Chapter 901, Secret. If Saul had realized from Camus's words several times that the black tide's impact on the wizard world was indeed terrifying, and that the wizard world would very likely be destroyed in the black tide, then Byron's understanding of the black tide was limited to the borderland and chaos realm. Today, a fourth-rank wizard at the world's top level suddenly said this world was already tottering, naturally causing Byron's past understanding to suffer a huge impact. So even though it was Frym speaking, Byron's first reaction wasn't to believe, but bewilderment. He looked toward Saul, seeming to want to say, why would Frym say this? But Saul temporarily had no way to explain to Byron, because he couldn't explain how he knew. So after Saul looked at Byron, he immediately learned Byron's expression. First reaction was bewilderment. Second reaction was solemnity tinged with fear. Actually, my first reaction was to say, how could a third-rank wizard like me possibly help with such matters? But your last sentence really puzzles me. How has our world reached a tottering state? Although there's the black tide threat, there's the sighing wall in the north, Red Sea tree forests in the southwest, plus Escaper continent's assistance in the middle. How is it tottering? What Saul really wanted to say was, how had it reached the point of tottering where a third-rank wizard like him was needed to help? You should know about the Abyssal Eye. Saul acknowledged by default. The Abyssal Eye's current state is like an ordinary person fallen into sleep, or us entering deep meditation. The black tide is actually equivalent to one breath of the Abyssal Eye, the Abyssal Eye's weakest activity. But once the Abyssal Eye awakens, even if it just turns over once, it will bring disasters more terrifying than the Abyssal Eye. Those disasters are enough to destroy this world. And now, because of certain people's activities and certain developments, the Abyssal Eye is about to awaken. Byron was now completely confused, but Frym definitely wouldn't take a second-rank wizard like him seriously. He wanted to inquire with that half-elf growing in his brain, but this half-elf wasn't responding to his calls at the critical moment. How useless. Saul was somewhat better than Byron, but he also didn't quite understand. Chief Frym, could you explain what you mean by because of certain people and certain things, the Abyssal Eye is about to awaken? Now Saul rather wanted to see Frym's expression, to see what kind of appearance the other had when saying these words. Since I called you here today and told you about the Abyssal Eye's impending awakening, naturally I'll tell you. Frym was unexpectedly reasonable today. Do you know why the black tide in the borderland is more terrifying than the black tide in the Red Sea? Without waiting for Saul's answer, Frym proactively explained, because the Storm Eye's black tide comes from the Abyssal Eye deep underground. Saul had once seen the wizard planet and the Abyssal Eye on the planet's back through the elf's vision, understanding that the Abyssal Eye was sunken into the planet's interior. Although this was incredible, beyond Saul's comprehensible wizard knowledge scope, the Abyssal Eye had truly achieved this. What if that depression, after passing through the Earth's core, twisted and crooked, but finally truly aimed at the borderland, preparing to penetrate through from the borderland? Frym's voice continued. After storm eyes erupt, we find anchor points inside them. Through multiple studies, we've confirmed anchor points are skeletal remains of special creatures and only small fragment pieces of skeletons. Frym's words matched the information Saul had learned. Those giant skeletons outside the Chaos Realm were truly anchor points. If there were so many, so large anchor point skeletons in the Abyssal Eye too, then once the Abyssal Eye erupted, wouldn't it mean all the anchor points inside would enter the wizard world? A single fragment could make a third-rank wizard undergo mutation death, with almost no resistance. So many anchor points descending. No, those skeletons shouldn't be called anchor points. Rather, the fragments of those skeletons entering the wizard world were called anchor points. Anchor points positioning objects. Those terrifying gray-white skeletons, should be using fragments to locate the path to the wizard world. So if the storm eye eruptions in the borderland exceeded a certain limit, with too many anchor points entering the wizard world, perhaps they would truly point out a pathway for the abyssal eye, allowing it to completely awaken, letting the terrifying giant skeletons inside descend upon the wizard world. A feeling of despair and powerlessness rose in Saul's heart. Cold chills pressed against every pore of his skin, drilling outward as if this could reduce his fear a little. Just then a hand tugged at Saul's sleeve. The muscle movement pulled at nerves, creating slight warmth that made Saul immediately turn around. Saul's confused eyes saw Byron behind him, whose face seemed to momentarily become half-elven. Saul's brain seemed struck by something. After slight dizziness, he regained clarity, no longer as despairing and fearful as before. Frim's voice suddenly stopped. Saul closed his eyes and shook his neck, then opened them with the fear gone from his eyes. "Chief Frim, I already understand the severity of the situation, but you haven't said what you mean by certain people and certain things." Speaking to this point, Saul simply stopped hiding and directly reminded Frim, "You're not referring to my master Gorsa, are you?" Frim's laughter rang out. "Seems you've already thought of it. Your true purpose in going to Kemaduchi was to help your master, not that little girl named Kelly, right? Have you already noticed something?" Although the other posed a question, regardless of whether Saul acknowledged it or not, Frim had already determined Saul had discovered part of the truth. Perhaps Gorsa told him. Perhaps he learned this secret from elsewhere, but it no longer mattered to Frim now. "It's better that you noticed. Gorsa, along with a batch of people the tribunal once executed, are all uncontrolled factors that would affect the abyssal eye's slumber. I knew this very early on. Unfortunately, at that time Glares Norton hadn't yet shown signs of decline. I had to borrow others' help to eliminate Gorsa. At that time, it was you who saved him, wasn't it?" Frim thought of the last Black Tide attack when he had used the Black Flame Emperor's cover, wanting to head to the far north, but ultimately failing to make the trip. If he wasn't certain Saul lacked the ability to control mermaids, he would suspect the last incident was also Saul secretly helping Gorsa, deliberately causing trouble to force him to return midway. Saul couldn't take credit at this moment. "I only stood on my master's side and did what I could, but with or without me, master wouldn't have been in trouble. Yes, I also didn't expect that he wasn't about to mutate then, but was delaying advancement, suppressing too harshly." Yes, Saul thought, when people can't hold it in, their expressions do become rather distorted. Chapter 902, Persuasion. What exactly made Frim scheme to kill his master when he was still second rank? Saul was also wondering if he might one day accidentally violate some taboo and be hunted by Frim too. "There's no misunderstanding," Frim's voice was very certain. "His name is on it." Saul's head shot up, though he still saw no one before him. "On what?" But this time Frim refused to say. This Q&A was completely dominated by Frim. If the other party didn't want to reveal something, Saul had no way to provoke him into speaking. Saul wouldn't think that just because Frim had asked for his help, he could now arrogantly command the other party. He sighed lightly in his heart and finally asked, "Then how do you hope I can help you? Let me state first, I don't think I can. Save the world. I know you possess a magical tool called the Dead Wizard's Diary." Boom! It was as if an explosion sounded in Saul's mind, yet he managed to conceal all excessive reactions with amazing willpower. He quickly raised his head to an appropriate angle, appropriately quickened his speech, and showed appropriate surprise and solemnity in his eyes. "I do indeed have this tool, but I'd like to know how you found out." Just after asking this question, a name rang out in Saul's mind. The next second, Frim also spoke this name. "Kismet, he told me. He said you could become a third-rank wizard so quickly, partly thanks to his help." Saul thought rapidly. That bastard Kismet doesn't know how many lies he's fabricated. Then he reconsidered. If Kismet is lying here, that's actually correct, since lies mean Frem won't truly understand what abilities the dead wizard's diary possesses. Sure enough, Frem then told a story that didn't quite match reality, but contained some truth. He said the dead wizard's diary was given to you by him. He helped you advance, providing certain resources at appropriate times, with the price being that you bear the dead wizard's diary's curse for him. I investigated afterward. Your lives indeed frequently intersected, though the occasions seemed few. For a hidden fourth rank and a wizard apprentice, it was still too frequent. Saul quickly caught the keyword curse in the other's words. Therefore, though his voice carried wariness, it remained relatively stable. Do you want the dead wizard's diary? Of course. Since it can create a wizard with extremely high immunity to black tides, it should also have methods against the Abyssal Eye. Even if it can't completely eradicate the Abyssal Eye, it's worth trying. Saul raised his left hand, and a dark red leather-bound hardcover book appeared in his palm. However, it wasn't open, remaining in a closed state. This is that diary. Saul directly extended his left hand while slightly raising his wrist. Kismet once said I had completely become the diary's master. You can try to see if you can take it away. As soon as he finished speaking, Saul felt a force sweep across his palm, but the diary remained floating quietly, not taken by anyone. Saul wasn't surprised. After all, the diary hadn't issued a warning. Seems I can't take it. Frem's voice also showed no surprise. The moment Saul produced the dead wizard's diary, he knew his first plan wouldn't work. Before Frem could propose other ideas, Saul quickly spoke. Chief Frem, have you heard of causality? Frem fell silent. Even Byron was hearing Saul mention this for the first time. For a moment, he couldn't think of anything else and hurriedly stared at Saul and the hardcover book in his hand. The dead wizard's diary has a characteristic almost no one knows about. Saul shared his speculations and information obtained from Kismet. People who have karmic connections with the diary's master cannot obtain the diary. Chief Frem, if you had suddenly struck to kill me before knowing about me or the dead wizard's diary, you might have had a chance to get the diary. Of course, the greater possibility is that the diary would disappear from then on, until someone completely unrelated to me appeared, and it fell into their hands. So when Kismet gave you the diary, yes, he didn't even know who I was. Frem was also speechless. Hey, Kismet. Saul lowered his eyes. This matter contained truth and falsehood, but the part about the dead wizard's diary was basically correct. So Seed, who had once wanted to steal his diary, didn't know that trying to use other unknowing people to kill Saul was fundamentally impossible. Even Seed's grandfather could never obtain the diary. They could only create meaningless slaughter. What followed was an even longer silence. Frem seemed to be considering what the probability would be of obtaining the diary if he found someone with no connection to Saul to kill him. But after brief consideration, Frem realized he couldn't find such a person at all. During Frem's silence, Byron slowly walked to Saul's side, vigilantly watching their surroundings. He thought Tribunal Chief Frem should be a rational person, but he also feared the other might suddenly have a brain malfunction, and want to try. Compared to Byron's wariness, Saul was more relaxed. He was clear that even if Frem really had a sudden lapse in judgment and wanted to try, it wouldn't be now. Frem currently has more important matters. He would definitely first take advantage of the opportunity when his master was lured to Kema, and he himself was brought here to eliminate Gorsa first. Yes, Saul was too clear about why Frem had forcibly brought him here again. And Frem should also be aware that Saul knew, but he still did this, obviously determined to succeed this time. Gorsa's failed advancement was a very rare opportunity for Frem. Even if his purpose was exposed, he had to exploit the time difference. Saul looked down at his toes. But then again, who wasn't? I understand. Seems you've completely mastered this unique magical tool. I won't waste effort trying to change its master, who could be better at using it than you now. Frym made his decision. At least for now, Saul was still the best collaboration choice. Even if he killed the other's master, the two wouldn't necessarily become mortal enemies. After all, they were both wizards. Knowledge and interests came first. Next, I'll give you some processed anchor points. You'll experiment with them first. If you can solve their pollution, I'll give you more primitive black tide anchor points. If you can solve even those, I can give you the position of tribunal chief. Chapter 903, Scouting Enemy Intelligence. Setting aside the extremely difficult preconditions, even if Frym directly let Saul succeed him now, Saul wouldn't want to accept. The tribunal was very different from Saul's Rhine City in the borderland. Rhine City didn't have such complex power structures, and even if it did, it would need over 10 years of development. By that time, it was uncertain whether Saul would still be in the borderland. After Frym left behind this empty promise, his voice no longer sounded and Byron breathed a long sigh of relief. His figure has disappeared. He should have left. Hearing Byron also thought the other had departed, Saul suddenly turned and walked outside. Byron didn't understand why, but he didn't ask and silently followed behind Saul. Saul walked all the way to the castle entrance and pulled open the door inward to see the tall and short wizard still guarding at the entrance. "Are you going to keep guarding here?" Saul asked them directly. The short wizard turned back with an inexplicable smile on his face. "Yes, if you have any needs, you can tell us." Saul was waiting for exactly these words from the dwarf. "Very good. I just accepted Chief Frym's commission and need to conduct some experiments. Prepare all these materials and send them in." Saul unceremoniously took out a parchment from his storage device, ordering the short wizard around like a subordinate. The short wizard's expression changed slightly, but he still took the parchment and glanced at its contents. Nothing particularly rare. His expression improved a bit as he nodded and put away the parchment. "Within an hour, you'll receive the required materials." "Very good." Saul nodded and closed the door himself. What Saul wanted were some magical materials he had frequently used during his last visit to Evernight, seemingly inconspicuous on the surface, so these people wouldn't refuse. But in fact, these materials concealed all the components Saul needed to set up a magical array connecting to the prismatic channel. As long as he could communicate with the prismatic world, even though Saul was confined in this castle, it wouldn't hinder his communication with the outside world or control of developments. Before long, the short wizard delivered all the materials as Saul requested. Byron immediately came over to help Saul prepare everything. Before the materials arrived, Saul and Byron had toured the entire castle. Subsequently, they chose a room with huge windows as their temporary laboratory. Saul first set up an array in the room that could block prying eyes. Byron arranged materials for creating inertization formulas according to his previous experiments. Saul appeared to be hiding secrets for combating black tide anchor point pollution, but was actually setting up an array connecting to the prismatic channel inside, while Byron's inertization formula preparation was actually to provide cover for Saul. Shortly after Frym left, Saul had completed the array setup. Next, with Byron, whose mental power had completely surpassed that of second-rank wizards standing guard, Saul closed his eyes and entered the prismatic world. On the magically stable platform casually arranged for Saul by the Death Demon, Saul immediately contacted Shea. "Shea, how are things on your end? Following your instructions, we've already delivered a letter to Lord Gorsa, but he still entered Kema's royal palace. Miss Kelly also hasn't directly contacted Lord Gorsa. She seems very afraid of Lord Gorsa. Kelly was afraid of Gorsa. This wasn't strange. Back in the Wizard Tower, Gorsa as Tower Master was a very terrifying existence in the hearts of other mentors and apprentices. At that time, he was wrapped in pink bandages, sleepwalking through the Wizard Tower every night with only a pair of silver eyes exposed, never deliberately restraining his mental pressure. In everyone's hearts, he was simply a moody great demon king. Only Saul was young and ignorant, and his own mental power was special, so he had never been able to feel how terrifying Gorsa's dispersed magical radiation was, even privately calling him Pink Big. Looking back now, he could only be grateful for the other's mercy in not killing him. But even until now, Saul had never truly figured out what exactly Master Gorsa wanted to do, what he truly desired. However, regardless of what Master Gorsa wanted to do, his past actions had earned Saul's trust, and the two had a strange understanding. This time, Saul also wanted to make good use of this understanding. Having made his decision, he turned to ask about Kiera. Kelly not meeting Master Gorsa is correct. Her purpose this time is to rescue Kiera, but if she acts together with Master Gorsa, the target would be too obvious and wouldn't facilitate safely rescuing Kiera. With Master Gorsa openly attracting everyone else's attention, your actions would be like walking in shadows behind the lights, very concealed. Shea's somewhat admiring voice came through. You're absolutely right. In fact, we've already found where Lady Kiera is under house arrest. It's just very strange she's not in Kema's royal palace, but in an agricultural manor on the outskirts of the royal city. Kelly and I are waiting outside the manor, planning to find an opportunity to enter. Kiera isn't in the royal palace, not even in the royal city. Hearing this news, Saul frowned. If Yura wants to use Kiera to threaten Gorsa, though I doubt she'll succeed, she should still keep Kiera by her side or in a secretly controlled location. But she sent her outside the city. Sending her outside the city didn't mean Kiera's life and death couldn't be controlled. But there were too many variables and it was unnecessary. There were clearly better choices. Saul's heart stirred. Could Yura have moved Kiera away to protect her? Shea was completely confused. How could kidnapping someone and using them to threaten Gorsa be for protection? Saul continued analyzing. There should be a trap in the royal palace, very likely aimed at Master Gorsa. Yura sending Kiera outside the royal palace might be to prevent her from being harmed in the trap, or to prevent her from disrupting the trap. After all, Kiera is also a veteran second rank. Once she goes all out, she can cause considerable impact. He asked Shea, have you discovered anything special in Kema's capital city and royal palace, especially Kelly? She lived there for several years. Has she noticed any differences? Shea's side was quiet for a moment, apparently communicating with Kelly. After a while, Shea replied somewhat puzzledly. Kelly says many soldiers in the royal city have been replaced, and we couldn't enter the royal palace. The person who sent us messages last time also hasn't responded to our signals. It feels like the entire royal palace has been sealed off, just from the outside. There don't seem to be any special changes. Buildings and decorations are all the same as before. Besides people changing, nothing else has changed. Saul found this strange. Master Gorsa couldn't be dealt with by ordinary traps. After thinking, Saul suddenly prompted them. Have there been any changes or anomalies related to light or light elemental particles? Shea hurriedly went to consult with Kelly again. After the two discussed for a moment, they finally gave Saul a valuable answer. Yes, Kelly says the castle rarely had lights on during the day before, but when we secretly went to look last time, we found all the visible windows had particularly bright rooms inside. At first Kelly thought it was Yura being overly extravagant, requiring all rooms to have lights on, because she had always done that in her own room before. She seems very afraid of the dark. Afraid of the dark? Not necessarily. Saul had already guessed what the other wanted to do, a cold smile forming at the corner of his mouth. I think when Yura defected to Kira, she was already preparing for this trap. Chapter 904, Failed Rehearsal. There should be Frim's participation. He was just in Evernight and should not have reached the other side yet. Even with ultra-long-distance teleportation arrays, getting from Evernight to Kema isn't something that can be accomplished in a short time. At this moment Floco, whom Saul had pulled over to listen in, spoke up. Saul, I think Frim might not necessarily go there this time. Oh, how so? Last time he planned to leave Nefret, we already exploited the loophole, causing the mermaid race to leave and massive damage to the Red Sea trees. So to ensure Nefret's safety, he probably won't leave here again. I suspect he might use descent magic or similar spells to have his soul directly descend to Kema through coordinated magical arrays on Yura's side. But I once saw Frim in a lantern. He didn't seem to need such elaborate preparations. That's different. His divided souls in a lantern could at most communicate with you or crush some low-rank wizards. But if he wants to kill Gorsa, he'd need to send at least a quarter or more of his mental power there. That's not something a lantern could bear. He'd need to use powerful wizards and special vessels. After hearing Floco's analysis, Saul fell into contemplation again. He had sneakily left the borderland with Byron deliberately for Frim to see, taking advantage of the opportunity to follow them to the tribunal. The purpose was to participate and disrupt the other's plan at the crucial moment, when Frim prepared to leave the tribunal again to assassinate Mentor Gorsa. Now, having learned that Frim wouldn't leave, this plan needed slight modification. I understand. Lord Floco, are you still at the Sighing Wall? Saul wanted to see if Floco could participate in this plan. I'm in the sea, also some distance from Stat Continent's coast. It seemed Floco couldn't participate. Saul wasn't discouraged. Although he lacked the pseudo-fifth rank's help, he had already gained sponsorship from another powerful ally. After exchanging intelligence with Shea and Floco, Saul's consciousness returned to the castle. At this time, Byron had already begun experimenting nearby. Although recent attention had been focused on bone monsters, Byron still hadn't completely abandoned his black tide inertization experiments. Now with Frim's commission, he could restart this experiment. Moreover, the black tide inertization experiment was originally his project. Saul could completely use this opportunity to arrange his own plan. Saul looked up at Senior Byron but didn't disturb the other's experiment. Instead, he walked to a corner, closed his eyes to meditate, then entered the consciousness platform in his mind. Although the dead wizard's diary's existence had been exposed, more than 3 people now knew about it, making continued concealment unnecessary. The diary's true usage methods were still unknown to others. Only Kismet knew this, so Saul couldn't expose it to others yet. Standing on the consciousness platform, with constantly blinking stars overhead, Saul took out the diary again. How does Frim plan to assassinate Master Gorsa? Diary, tell me. Gorsa was very far from Saul. If not for their already very close and solid relationship, it would be extremely difficult for Saul to use the diary for death warnings. He let the dark red hardcover book open in his palm, turning to the blank white pages section. Black thin lines emerged from the pages, extending toward the distant starry sky before disappearing halfway. Countless black thin lines appeared, gradually covering the consciousness space near the platform, turning the entire space Saul occupied into a black and white sketch world. Only the distant starry sky continued blinking at high frequency, seemingly unaffected by the dead wizard's diary's warning. After a moment, the black lines all contracted, erased like wallpaper, and the world returned to colorful three-dimensionality. Saul opened his eyes with a somewhat serious expression and puzzled look. Why, can't I see any death warning for Master Gorsa at all? Saul had just sensed Gorsa's presence, but the diary hadn't issued a warning, as if, the other had no death tribulation at all. Saul exited the consciousness platform. The castle room was empty, so he could only sit in the corner leaning against the wall. Thinking and thinking, he suddenly laughed. Nothing, absolutely nothing, it's not at all. Hearing Saul's laughter, Byron, who was experimenting, couldn't help but look up. He saw that Saul either had mental problems or was genuinely happy from the bottom of his heart. Thinking there should be no issue, he lowered his head to continue experimenting. Anyway, if Saul needed him to do something, he'd tell him directly. After Saul finished laughing and got up from the ground, he walked to Byron's side. Byron's work didn't stop. He just glanced at Saul, indicating he was listening. I'm planning to call Kelly over. Some experimental steps can only be completed by her. Upon hearing this, Byron finally stopped his movements, looked up at Saul seriously. Are you sure you want Kelly to conduct experiments here? What experiment would require Kelly to come? Byron didn't need to guess to know. He just needed to confirm with Saul, since in this place, at the tribunal, many things required careful consideration. Yes, Saul also answered Byron seriously. In fact, this experiment was prepared specifically for today. Byron stared at Saul for a while, then nodded. I understand. Then he continued his experiment with lowered head, as if he just heard a casual greeting rather than a shocking and dangerous decision. In the following days, Frym would come chat with Saul almost daily. Understanding Saul's current experimental progress, understanding Saul's ideas, and also sharing some tribunal experience in combating black tides. If someone unaware of the inside story came, they'd probably think the two were conducting very compatible academic research. But Saul knew everything was Frym putting on an act, being perfunctory. Frym also clearly knew Saul hadn't begun true black tide experiments yet. But he wasn't anxious either. Before Gorsa died, Saul couldn't possibly wholeheartedly cooperate with him. 3 days later, Kelly pretended to be discovered by tribunal people, then like Saul, came from Kema's royal capital to Evernight Empire, and under the short wizard's escort, entered the abandoned castle where Saul was imprisoned. Shea, this hidden piece, remained in the royal city to continue standby. Saul met Kelly in the dim corridor as she entered the castle, watching her run in. The short wizard remained outside without entering. Kelly kicked the door shut and pulled Saul inside. Is it convenient to talk here? Kelly asked. Let's go to the second floor. Saul pulled Kelly back. And the two quickly walked up to the second-floor laboratory. As soon as Kelly entered the laboratory, she recognized the central magical array as one blocking prying eyes. She pulled Saul inside and shook off his hand. Are you planning to kill Frym? Kelly stared at Saul, her eyes seemingly ablaze with fire. Like anger, like disbelief, yet also seeming to have a little bit of excitement. No, that would be too wasteful of resources, Saul smiled. Chapter 905, Activation. Kelly joined Saul's small squad rebelling against the tribunal, both worried sick and trembling with excitement. If she hadn't been disciplined by Grand Duke Kira these past 2 years, she would probably already be cursing out loud like Saul. The few people carefully arranged the upcoming plan within the anti-surveillance array, but whether Byron or Kelly, they only knew what they needed to do. Saul didn't tell them about other arrangements. Although knowing Saul had many secret arrangements, Byron and Kelly didn't ask much. Kelly was very curious, but after Saul clearly stated they weren't suitable to know currently and that he would definitely tell them everything afterward, she stopped asking. She just rolled her eyes a few more times, somewhat unhappily. On the 4th day after Kelly's arrival, Frym communicated with Saul about experimental progress as usual. But after Frim's voice disappeared, Byron immediately patted Saul's left shoulder. This meant today's Frim was different from before. Byron, possessing special elven mental power, was very sensitive to mental power fluctuations. Although today's Frim figure appearing before his eyes didn't differ much, he still keenly noticed the other's figure was slightly blurred. So Byron immediately used a bit of elven ability to observe Frim's image again. Through elven vision, he was more certain that Frim's projection had indeed become somewhat blurred. This had never happened in previous days. So Byron immediately followed his prior agreement with Saul and warned him. Saul only felt his shoulders sink as his heart began racing wildly. He's gone. The divided soul has left. The Frim remaining at the tribunal isn't complete. His strength has decreased by at least 1/3, perhaps half. Dividing attention between two tasks didn't reduce strength proportionally. Saul took a deep breath to calm himself, then said to Kelly and Byron, "It's time." The three exchanged glances, then took their respective items. Saul stood by the window. When originally choosing this as a laboratory, what he valued was this huge window. Saul pressed his hand against the glass, immediately feeling the sealing power on it. The seemingly fragile glass actually had a layer of sealing outside. Saul's palm applied gentle force, and magical power immediately oscillated violently. The glass began vibrating slightly, then with a bang, the entire window was instantly covered with fine, dense cracks. The shattered glass immediately emitted dazzling light like blazing noon sun, but it didn't last a breath before scattering outward like snowflakes under Saul's forceful slap. This castle, this room, naturally couldn't confine Saul. Otherwise, the tall and short third-rank wizards wouldn't have been guarding outside all along. The massive light emitted when the glass shattered immediately attracted the attention of the two third-rank wizards below. Obviously, the castle's ceiling served more as a warning function. The two wizards saw the glass fragments shaken from the room and became furious. One window naturally wasn't much, but what angered them was that Saul breaking the glass meant not following rules. Especially at this sensitive moment, the giant-like tall wizard bared his teeth and was about to fly over, but was stopped by the short wizard. Let me ask clearly first. The short wizard was more rational. Although angry, he still decided to check the situation first. What if it was an experimental explosion that caused the glass to shatter? After the glass broke, no one rushed out from inside, which made the short wizard slightly relieved. Perhaps they were indeed too sensitive. However, just as he flew to the second-floor broken window, he saw Saul and two other second-rank wizards all standing by the window. The magical array beneath their feet was emitting a faint glow, but he couldn't sense any magical power fluctuations. "It's a concealment-type magical array. I knew you weren't honest." The short wizard's anger rose again. But before he could respond, he saw Saul standing at the window's edge suddenly extend his left hand toward him. Subsequently, countless black blades appeared between them, so numerous and densely arranged they almost formed a 3-meter-thick black wall between them. Defense! Seeing the other launch a spectacular attack spell without a word, the short wizard didn't hesitate and immediately activated his most powerful defensive magic. Instantly, his entire body became a semi-transparent shadow. Although this spell wasn't the highest-ranked defensive magic he mastered, it had the terrifying ability to deflect damage, making him almost immune to most attack spells. Almost simultaneously, Saul's tens of thousands of black blades shot out, instantly passing through the short wizard's body as if firing a black laser, flying very far before gradually extinguishing. Only then did the tall wizard react, having no time to think whether his companion was still alive. "Bastard!" The tall wizard punched the castle wall beside him. That wall immediately lost half its mass, while the tall wizard's figure grew another half-meter. He kicked off with both feet, his fists almost door-sized, heading directly toward the torrent of black blades. He wanted to rescue the short wizard first. When the tall wizard's fists struck the black blade cluster, an invisible wave immediately spread, making the orderly black blades scatter in all directions. The short wizard's transparent figure finally revealed itself partially. The tall wizard immediately extended his arm, wanting to help the short wizard block some black blades. The two worked together, one attacking, one defending. As long as he helped the short wizard block attacks, the latter could deliver a fatal counterattack. But just as his hand reached halfway, his mental power suddenly emitted chaotic fluctuations, as if something was affecting his brain. The tall wizard's peripheral vision scattered, vaguely seeing something white charging toward him. The tall wizard's expression didn't change, as he immediately raised his foot to sweep at the opponent. A fierce wind-breaking sound rang out, as if a huge cannonball fired from his toes, heading straight for the enemy. Crack! The tall wizard seemed to hear something shatter. HMPH, my defense was never passive defense. My belief is that offense is the best defense. Though the tall wizard was full of pride, he didn't forget his task was still to block attacks for the short wizard. His previously extended arms movement didn't change, planning to continue blocking attacks for the short wizard. But before his extended arm could completely shield the short wizard, time suddenly stopped, or rather space-time stagnated in his consciousness. The white giant object originally in his peripheral vision didn't disappear from the previous attack, but silently, lightning fast, approached the tall wizard. The tall wizard only felt something hit his side waist, not much force, normally unable to break through his outer magical defensive array. But accompanying the impact was a strong and familiar twisting force. The tall wizard felt as if he'd become a piece of cloth, grabbed at the center and spun violently. First skin, then muscle, fascia, bones, organs. In the tall wizard's consciousness, even the world before his eyes had become a pool of mixed colorful paint. It's pollution. At the critical moment, the tall wizard didn't give up resistance, but tried using the spell inscribed in his spiritual body, Heart of Stone, to resist this sudden terrifying pollution. However, the next second, already sensing chaos, he suddenly felt something pressing against his forehead. Soft and slippery objects wrapped around his face, tiny tentacles drilling through his eyes, ears, and nostrils. Jelly-like substance broke through skull gaps, slowly wandering through brain grooves. All external perception disappeared. The tall wizard's final consciousness was feeling himself turn into a pool of blood, bit by bit being completely absorbed by the intruder. Chapter 906, External Support. The short wizard's best defensive technique couldn't be moved while being cast. Otherwise, his body's transformation rate would drastically decrease, and he'd have no way to dodge Saul's dense attacks. Seeing that this spell's duration was about to end, but the first wave of attacks seemed far from over, the short wizard grew anxious. High-rank wizard battles were often measured in seconds. In the short wizard's perception, 3 seconds should have already passed in the outside world. But for some reason, the tall wizard who should have come to support him showed no response. If he couldn't escape this terrifying magical flow before the invisibility defense ended, he'd probably suffer severe damage this time. Just as the short wizard was thinking about what magical tool could block the black torrent before him, a white dot suddenly appeared in his vision. The next second, only that bit of white remained in the short wizard's eyes. The scene froze again. The white was even more domineering than ink dropped in water. After entering the short wizard's field of vision, it rapidly began expanding, turning the surrounding black blades white, dyeing the short wizard's body white, turning his entire thoughts white. Thus white became the last color the short wizard could perceive in his life, and his only cognition. The black torrent quickly scattered like burning ash, and a short wizard turned completely white fell from midair. He hit the ground with a bang, shattering like a plaster sculpture into several pieces. These shattered areas were white inside and out, as if he had never been a living person but stone. Saul covered his left hand, looking down at the short wizard on the ground. Near the short wizard's fragments was the tall wizard, who had already become a pool of flesh. High above, Kelly riding a white giant dragon looked horrified, but when she saw Saul look up, she still extended trembling arms and gave him a thumbs up. Just now Saul had broken the window, drawing the short wizard's investigation. Upon first meeting, he released the long-accumulated soul blades. Meeting with an ultimate move, he directly caught the other completely off guard. Then Saul ignored the short wizard and directly faced the tall wizard who came after. When the tall wizard tried to rescue the short wizard, Saul immediately signaled Byron to activate the Chaos Realm Compass. This time they didn't go through, but directly pulled the bone monster they had placed at the exit. Subsequently, Byron, who had no pollution resistance, immediately left the battlefield and returned to the castle's depths. When he pulled out the bone monster, he had already completed communication. The subsequent actions had nothing to do with him. Kelly immediately activated her radiation ability, rode the bone monster, and after knocking aside the tall wizard blocking the way, flew to high altitude to wait for Saul. Saul was responsible for clearing the two obstacles in their action line. To save time, Saul directly used his ultimate move. The tall wizard hit by the bone dragon was immediately polluted. While the other hadn't yet broken free from the pollution's influence, Saul immediately pressed the anchor point sealed at his left index fingertip onto the tall wizard. The tall wizard, who originally still had the ability to save himself, instantly mutated. Without even time to react, like the former Firefly Lord Herbert, he died beyond recognition. Saul was stunned for less than a second, then immediately turned to attack the short wizard defending in the soul blades. Once the anchor point appeared, the short wizard similarly had no resistance. Only his form of mutating was completely different from the tall wizard's. Looking at two third-rank wizards who couldn't be more dead, without even a chance of resurrection, Saul quickly sealed his left hand and flew to high altitude, standing alongside Kelly riding the bone dragon. Whatever it is, let's talk after this is over. Kelly, riding the dragon, still had a trembling voice. All right, Saul shrugged. Actually, I'm quite scared too, so you don't need to be embarrassed. Kelly was angry from embarrassment. Even at this time, Saul was still joking. Let's go, you lead the way. This long fellow isn't as easy to control as the monster fish. We must hurry. Saul also became serious. Maze corridor over there. The two transformed into one black and one white shadow, flying directly toward the maze corridor. The long monster Kelly mentioned was actually a new monster Saul, and Byron had processed and assembled based on the bone fish, using collected bone monster remains. Its body was nearly 100 meters long and narrow, with two huge bone spurs on its head and 5 differently shaped claws on its body. Overall, it resembled an Eastern dragon from Saul's memory. Kelly, riding the unfamiliar dragon form, struggled to maintain balance. She didn't understand why Saul had assembled bone monster remains into this appearance, but she could feel the monster beneath her was even more powerful and terrifying than Saul's bone-flying lizard. When it first arrived in the wizard world, its terrifying pollution nearly affected Kelly despite her prepared radiation protection. However, such a terrifying monster also gave Kelly some confidence in today's action. The two flew toward the maze corridor. Although they had dealt with two third-rank wizards in just over 10 seconds, The commotion couldn't be hidden from wizards at the nearby Red Sea trees. Soon Saul noticed large numbers of wizards flying to high altitude and immediately flying toward them. Looking at the small black dots rushing over against the morning sun in the azure-clear sky, Saul had Kelly continue forward. "You go first, I'll catch up quickly. You're not planning to block so many people by yourself, are you?" "No, I'm calling for external support." After speaking, Saul took out a seemingly ordinary letter from his storage device. He held the letter between two fingers and snapped with a snap. The entire letter immediately began burning, releasing golden flames. This letter was exactly the nameless letter Saul received at the Purity Wizard Tower. It was also this letter that helped Saul make his final decision to completely tear off the mask with this arrogant, stubborn, and terrifying fourth rank wizard at the critical moment when Frim ambushed Master Gorsa. The letter's light grew brighter and brighter. Saul's fingertips felt burning pain, as if he held not flames but a sun. Then a figure walked out from the light. The Glare family patriarch stepped out, surveying left and right, his gaze directly fixed on those wizards flying from the Red Sea. Although they didn't immediately flee, no one dared take another step forward. This was the might of a fourth-rank wizard. The next second, the might descended upon Saul. "Your signal came too early." Norton stared at Saul, his mood unreadable. Saul bowed respectfully. "The maze corridor is just ahead. I only hope to borrow your might to save some time." Although Norton had told Saul in the letter to summon him when directly facing Frim, if you had a trump card, why wait until severely injured to play it? Was it faster to fight enemies for hours than forcibly break into the maze corridor? Or was it faster to borrow fourth-rank Wizard Norton's terrifying pressure to directly sweep away Small Fry and Swagger into the maze corridor? The answer was obvious. Chapter 907, Attack. Both simultaneously turned to look at the slender bone monster floating in the sky ahead. Upon seeing that white dragon, Norton's expression changed slightly, but when he sensed the pollution on it wasn't as terrifying as anchor points, he breathed a slight sigh of relief. "Where did you get this monster from?" "It's called the Bone Dragon, my secret weapon." Saul smiled but didn't really answer Norton's question. Norton glanced at Saul but didn't ask further. He simply erupted in a ball of blazing, sun-like blinding light, completely enveloping both him and Saul. The next instant, the light sphere had already caught up to the Bone Dragon and blocked in front of Kelly, clearing the way for her. By now, the tribunal wizards were basically all alarmed. They had discovered Saul's group was targeting tribunal headquarters, so wizards immediately commanded everyone to activate defensive arrays. But when they discovered that fighting alongside Saul was actually Glare Patriarch Norton, almost all were so frightened they nearly somersaulted in midair. Quickly go request the Black Flame Emperor." A few wizards knew Frim currently had important matters and was temporarily unable to emerge from the maze corridor, so they hurriedly sent people to request the tribunal's other fourth-rank wizard. Others, relying on their tribunal background, stepped forward to reason with Norton. Lord Norton, coming to Nefrit Continent without making a declaration already violates the agreement between the tribunal and Stargate Council. Please, don't advance further. We've already gone to request the chief and Lord Alo. Norton raised his hand to strike but suddenly heard Saul say, "Lord Norton, try not to kill. We're only overthrowing Frim, but the Black Tide still needs the tribunal to resist." Norton lightened the force of his striking hand. A beam of light suddenly struck the wizard blocking Norton. The latter immediately emitted black smoke and fell from high altitude. Saul swept with mental power. That wizard was severely injured but not dead, which was fine. The one Norton casually burned into a coal ball was also a third-rank wizard. With him struck down, others dared not step forward. But these tribunal wizards weren't completely intimidated either. They still blocked the path, trying to prevent them from approaching tribunal headquarters. Another third-rank wizard appeared, standing at the forefront of those confronting Saul. It was Royer. He looked at Saul with shock, and before he could speak, he saw Norton beside Saul. Remembering subordinates reports that the last person to dialogue with Norton had been burned into charcoal by scorching light and was barely alive when dragged away for treatment, Royer couldn't help swallowing. "Lord Norton, have you come to the tribunal to find Chief Frym?" Royer still stepped forward. Who knew Norton completely ignored him. Two strong lights emanated from Norton's hands, like the morning sun suddenly leaping from the sea, night abruptly becoming day. Except for Saul and Kelly, everyone else seemed stunned by this dazzling light, all staring dumbfounded at Norton with stagnant minds. "Go," Norton placed a hand on Saul's shoulder, leading them to continue forward with Kelly. Strangely, this time, none of the blocking wizards positioned themselves in their path again. Saul and Kelly followed Norton forward. When they passed the present wizards, these people still stared dazedly at Norton's original position, as if instantly bewitched. But Saul also knew that even though Norton was a fourth-rank wizard, he couldn't confuse so many tribunal wizards for long. They hurriedly passed through the crowd and finally reached above tribunal headquarters. "Where is the maze corridor?" Norton asked. Since the Stargate Council and Tribunal began opposing each other, Norton hadn't set foot on Nefrit Continent again, so he didn't understand the current maze corridor. Saul looked at Tribunal headquarters and was about to point underground when he suddenly felt something wrong. He extended his hand, letting a special fate line drill out from his palm. That fate line was the one that had previously found Stuart's soul in the maze corridor. Now, instead of extending downward, it bobbed and actually began climbing upward. Above, Saul immediately flew upward and quickly found the positioning point in midair. He marked the spot in the air, then turned back to Kelly. "Kelly, crash in." Kelly gritted her teeth, controlling the increasingly restless bone dragon. Crash! She smashed toward the air. Banged! Kelly didn't pass through the air. The world before her eyes began distorting as a black tangled mess appeared where she had struck. The tangle rapidly grew and spread, gradually showing angles and intervals. Saul looked closely. It was like a square pattern, then continuously rotating and replicating again, gradually becoming a complex but regular planar figure. "Dimensional folding technique," Norton said, then patted Saul's left shoulder once. "Frym has come out. Next I'll force him to the innermost part." Saul nodded. "I'll have the bone dragon destroy the outer corridors." The layered corridors were an endless battlefield. Norton needed to suppress the remaining soul portions before Frym's divided spirit returned. He had no time to play hide-and-seek inside. After brief instructions, Norton suddenly transformed into a ray of sunlight, diving into the multiple squares, his presence completely disappearing. This time without Saul's direction, Kelly knew what she had to do. She gripped the bone dragon's two protruding horns, eyes fixed on the still rotating, replicating squares. Gradually, these dense, complex images had become strings of magical formulas dancing before Kelly's eyes. Like a lizard, she stared at the dancing formulas, waiting for the moment to deliver a fatal strike. Behind Kelly, tribunal wizards were beginning to regain consciousness. Due to Saul's request and energy conservation needs, Norton hadn't gone on a killing spree, but used the purest and most powerful light attribute energy to shock the tribunal wizards' spiritual bodies into high-frequency trembling. Now, as the trembling slowed, these wizards' consciousness was gradually recovering. Even so, Kelly remained calm, as if she'd forgotten she and Saul were surrounded by enemies, her mind containing only the figures before her and the formulas processed and decomposed by her brain. Royer blinked, his neck stiffly turning toward Kelly like machinery. He saw the white bones beneath Kelly that seemed like black tide monsters, and the girl whose skin was metallic all over. His arm had already risen to aim at Kelly's head before his mind cleared, but then another pale hand pressed his arm down. Saul stood behind Royer. Now he only needed to extend one finger to make the wizard before him follow the fate of the short and tall wizards. But Saul didn't do this. He only pressed down Royer's arm, then said quietly behind him, "The Red Sea trees and Mido still need you." At this instant, the crouched Kelly suddenly moved, along with the bone dragon she rode, fiercely charging toward the upper left corner of the multiple square pattern. With a crack, as if something shattered, half the dragon's head entered the multiple square plane but didn't emerge from the other side. Kelly succeeded. Using only Saul's analysis and the ripples caused by Norton's entry, Kelly had found the angle to enter the maze corridor in such a short time. Then Kelly's palm struck hard against the bone dragon's neck, two invisible waves conducting into the bone dragon's body. You go in. Chapter 908, 1 against 10,000. The nearly 100-meter-long white dragon just disappeared into the planar figure, as if entering another world, and that was indeed the case. Saul then came to the entrance of the maze corridor, but he didn't enter. Instead, he stood at the entrance, suddenly turned around and looked at the wizards and soldiers in the sky and on the ground who were recovering and slowly approaching. By now the sun had risen to mid-sky. Sea breeze blew from the Red Sea, occasionally carrying fragments of red leaves into the royal capital. Evernight Royal City was built by the sea, and everyone bore the mission of resisting black tides. Even their Emperor Alexandra had to donate blood weekly to lure mermaids to gnaw at polluted Red Sea tree roots. Even now, because of the need to communicate and coordinate with Mido, Sander still couldn't leave the vicinity of the coastline. Similarly, tribunal headquarters was also built here, seemingly declaring to the world their determination to fight black tides to the end. Saul had never doubted their determination, which was why he had actively joined the black tide resistance operations initially. Although he had personal motives this time, he also had the resolve to protect Nefrit together with other wizards. So even though today he united with the Glare Patriarch to attack the maze corridor, he didn't truly classify all tribunal wizards as enemies, especially these people who had once fought alongside him. At this moment, Royer had completely recovered. Looking at Saul blocking in front of him, he understood very well what Saul intended to do. He looked at Saul, both sad and angry. Alfonso had also once betrayed Lord Frym. At that time, Royer had also struggled for a long time, secretly advising for a long time. Even when Frym clearly said Alfonso couldn't be warned, he had still subtly reminded the other twice. So when Alfonso really took that step, Royer's anger had already been mostly exhausted. But Saul was different. He felt both guilt and admiration toward Saul. So facing Saul, he was angry, but his sadness was directed at Chief Frym. Royer also didn't understand why Gorsa had to be killed. Just like he didn't understand the several innocent people the chief had previously killed while mixed in the rebel list. But he knew that if Chief Frym hadn't insisted on repeatedly attempting to secretly assassinate Gorsa, they could have cooperated well with Saul. Just like their cooperation in cultivating Mido. But now things had reached this point. He absolutely couldn't watch Saul threaten their chief. Saul, your actions constitute a declaration of war against the tribunal, if you now. Saul could already guess what Royer wanted to say, nothing more than surrender negotiations, but he didn't want to hear it. So Saul directly interrupted, Royer, you're wrong. I am indeed declaring war, but not against the tribunal, against Frym. More and more people had recovered from Norton's shock. They slowly gathered behind Royer, pressing down like dark clouds. Their gazes were like arrows, as if 10,000 arrows would fire the next second. Just the shadows of these people had already dragged half of Evernight Royal City into night. The roads and squares in the royal city could no longer see a single ordinary person walking outside. They hid in homes, in cellars, trembling with fear that the flames of war would crush them. Although they also knew the concrete debris overhead fundamentally couldn't protect their lives. Under these oppressive dark clouds that could even block the sun, although Saul was alone, he still stood calmly at the entrance to the maze corridor. Looking at such a Saul, Royer felt some admiration for him, but what use was admiration? Your declaration of war against Chief Frym is a declaration of war against the entire tribunal. Give up, Saul. Look at these wizards behind me. Do you still want to fight 10,000 alone? Don't think Wizard Norton can protect you. Emperor Elo will arrive soon, and we've already contacted the Stargate Council. Chairman Alec won't agree to Wizard Norton warring with the tribunal either. By now more and more wizards were arriving from various places. They surrounded Saul front, back, left, right, even above and below, as if forming a human cage to imprison Saul again. But unexpectedly, Saul didn't sense much cold killing intent in this enormous cage. He looked around and found many people's gazes toward him were extremely complex. Saul smiled inwardly, suddenly cast magic to let everyone hear his voice. Can Lord Frym completely represent the tribunal? Can he completely represent Evernight Empire and all living beings on Nefrit continent? I didn't come today to overthrow the tribunal, but as resistance from someone constantly oppressed by Frym. You respect and love Frym, isn't it, because he's leading everyone to resist black tides? But in fact, he's now abandoning Nefrit continent for personal interests. Do you know why the black tide monster backflow caused by the mermaid aberrant last time caused such great destruction? It was precisely because when everyone was resisting black tides, Frym secretly went to other continents to assassinate third-rank wizards who wouldn't obey his commands. Upon these words, everyone was in an uproar. Royer had sensed trouble as soon as Saul mentioned aberrant mermaid and wanted to stop Saul from continuing, but Saul was prepared and directly had Penny ambush him. He suddenly became tongue-tied with brain cramps and couldn't stop Saul from revealing the truth. Now that Saul had spoken, further obstruction was meaningless. Just as Royer was about to check his condition, he vaguely saw a silver butterfly fly into Saul's brow. This cunning bastard, Royer cursed inwardly. He couldn't help looking around and found many wizards shocked by Saul's words. Although the encirclement remained, it had loosened, letting several rays of sunlight through. He quickly also spoke loudly. Chief Frym's departure was also to strike rebels on purge orders. Their existence would only bring harm to Nefrit continent. Fundamentally, it's all about resisting black tides and protecting Nefrit. Ha, it is because you say so. On what basis? Isn't it just that whoever doesn't submit to Frym he wants to kill? Saul laughed loudly, quietly switching concepts. At critical moments, verbal battles couldn't be lost either. Just then, the outermost outline of the rotating overlapping squares behind Saul suddenly exploded, then shattered like broken glass into several pieces and disappeared into the air. Hearing the sound, Saul spun around, his heart elated. Kelly success. The bone dragon had already caused irreversible damage to the maze corridor. When Frym sensed his nest being raided and hurriedly returned, he would find waiting for him wasn't just the tribunal, but also his old opponent, Norton Glare. The maze corridor's anomaly was a sign of Kelly's success, but also like a signal that completely destroyed any possibility of negotiation between Royer and Saul. Saul, immediately stop the destruction, or I'll have to kill you, then go in and kill that girl too. Even Wizard Norton will perish under the pincer attack of the chief and his majesty Elo. Royer roared, but this time he didn't wait for Saul's answer at all. He also knew he wouldn't get one, directly summoning a mass of deep blue flames flying toward Saul. Royer's attack was a signal. The surrounding sea of black wizards also began casting attack spells. In Saul's gray pupils, colorful lights and shadows from various spells suddenly filled his vision. Multicolored interweaving, constantly changing, flickering uncertainly, as if returning to the prismatic world. Saul knew this battle was necessary until Thrym was completely captured. Then come. Chapter 909. Below 4th rank, none can match. As soon as Saul finished speaking, his body suddenly began transforming. From the black wizard robe sleeves, hem, and trouser legs, twisting and expanding gray tentacles emerged. The changes weren't limited to this, but just as they reached this point, the deep blue flames had already struck Saul's body. However, Saul didn't dodge at all. The blue flames suddenly expanded, quickly engulfing Saul's entire form. Subsequently, more attack spells fell into the deep blue flames. The more attack spells injected, the larger the deep blue fireball grew, as if those later spells had all become its fuel. Royer wasn't happy about this or relaxed his guard. He clearly knew Saul couldn't be defeated so easily. So he immediately began casting his second spell, Abyssal Throw. This was a 5th rank spell, quite difficult to control even among 5th rank magic. The Abyss here didn't originally refer specifically to the Abyssal Eye. It would open a spatial rift, then hurl enemies into extremely dangerous places. But after the wizard world was sealed, every time this spell was cast, the rifts opened all led to the Abyssal Eye. This spell's danger lay in the fact that when the rift opened, some pollution would seep through from the other side, and unknown entities might even take the opportunity to cross over. So Royer had to fight quickly, make Saul fall in the instant it opened, then immediately close the rift. Just as Royer chanted the incantation, Saul was still being attacked by numerous spells. And that deep blue fireball kept expanding. Not good. A wizard who was relatively close suddenly noticed something wrong and quickly retreated. Then everyone discovered the deep blue flames had somehow changed shape. Fire tongues burned and twisted in the air, looking like a massive monster covered in tentacles. Quickly stop attacking, finally someone reacted. The more spells invested, or rather magic power, the more vigorous the opponent's flames became, and the more massive the terrifying body hidden beneath the flames grew. Suddenly, a blue fire tongue exploded outward like a tentacle twisting and lashing, striking hard against Royer. Instantly, burning full-body armor appeared on Royer's surface, blocking the strike for him. But it only blocked once. The armor shattered inch by inch, and the flames turned to black smoke, drifting away helplessly. He turned my world-destroying fire into a weapon to attack me. Royer was greatly shocked, and the abyssal throw he was preparing nearly collapsed. He couldn't understand how Saul could withstand such intense flame attacks, or how he had turned others' attacks into fuel. But he had no time to think. "Cover me!" Royer roared. Immediately wizards came to help Royer resist Saul flame tentacle attacks. These were mainly Royer's subordinates and some 3rd-rank wizards. But if Royer had been distracted to look, he would have found that some wizards weren't attacking seriously, especially several wizards who had been treated by Saul. They were merely standing in the crowd without participating in the assault. Constrained by their status and position, they stood here, yet also troubled by Saul's assistance. At the same time, they wondered whether Chief Thrym was truly resisting black tides with all his heart, whether he had indeed forgotten his original intentions as Saul claimed. These doubts, confusion, and struggle spread like a contagion among tribunal wizards, making each wizard's attacks become weak and powerless. Of course, many people were completely unaffected by Saul and attacked him frantically. Being able to openly strike at such a famous and high-rank wizard would let them say proudly in the future, "That Saul was killed by me and my companions." One wizard with such thoughts was already secretly approaching. He held a fourth-rank spell scroll of Thunder Strike. In his eyes, Saul, who was on fire and physically mutated, couldn't hold on much longer. If he could use this spectacular scroll to deliver the final blow, he would immediately become the most famous second-rank wizard on Nefrit continent. But just as his finger touched the scroll, before he could activate it, he suddenly found everything going black. Lightning attribute forbidden approach, little algae bite him. This became the last words heard by this second-rank wizard, who harbored beautiful dreams for the future. Saul naturally noticed the movements of Nightmare Butterfly and little algae, but didn't stop them. Most of his body had now become semi-transparent gray tentacles. The exterior was ignited by Royer's flames, but such powerful flames actually helped block other people's attacks. Those low-rank attack spells were destroyed by the flames on Saul's surface before they could even touch him. Once their structure was disrupted, the spells became scattered magic elemental particles. Saul steeled his heart and simply began absorbing these scattered elemental particles, using them to replenish his magic power and repair the shell burned by blue flames. Burning force and healing force opposed each other, actually achieving a delicate balance. But this balance normally couldn't last long, because directly absorbing scattered elemental particles put enormous pressure on the spiritual body. One careless moment could transform spiritual body oscillation into spiritual body contamination. It could be called a suicidal self-rescue method. Even with Saul's abnormally powerful soul body, an extremely terrifying locator, he couldn't persist long in this situation. But he had to persist. If this counterplan against Frym couldn't succeed, then he and everyone helping him would face Frym's terrifying retaliation afterward. So he had to persist, had to block all of the tribunal's attacks. Saul suddenly opened his two eyes. He suddenly opened hundreds of eyes. The massive blue flame tentacle body, large as a small mountain, suddenly opened tens of thousands of eyes. What? Royer, who had just prepared the abyssal throw, involuntarily looked up and made eye contact with one of the eyes in the blue flames. Upon this eye contact, he knew trouble was coming but couldn't move his gaze away. The abyssal rift had already opened but had no designated target, so the rift gradually expanded, trying to find a target on its own. Royer was still forced to maintain eye contact with the eye in the blue flames, but his peripheral vision also noticed the expanding rift. He was immediately frightened into cold sweats with twitching facial muscles, yet still couldn't move, as if maintaining eye contact with that eye was more important than his life. But without a target, the abyssal rift's first target would naturally be Royer, who was closest to it. Sweat on Royer's forehead had already gathered into several streams flowing down. One drop fell to the abyssal rift's edge and actually emitted an infant-like cry before being torn into the rift, the crying abruptly stopping. The rift seemed to have found its target and suddenly accelerated toward Royer's robe hem. However, just then, a hand of only black bone, suddenly pressed against the rift's edge, then contacted the rift. 5 fingers gripped hard and the rift exploded like a balloon with a bang. The magic power maintaining the rift instantly collapsed. The rift was directly closed, and the abyssal aura was cut off. Royer felt he could move again. His entire body was soaked, as if he could hear those sweat drops wailing and celebrating their narrow escape from death. He couldn't even tell if it was hallucination or if he really heard it. Like a rusty machine, he stiffly twisted his neck, only then discovering that except for him, everyone else had fallen to the ground. But regardless of what posture or state they had fallen into, as long as they still had eyes, They were all staring at the eyes in the massive blue flames, as if that was more important than anything else. Chapter 910. The Die is Cast. He kept his head down, not daring to look at Saul's transformed monster. What's with those eyes? Why are they more terrifying than a fourth-rank wizard's intimidation? No, fourth-rank wizards only intimidate by disrupting our soul bodies, but those eyes aren't. Royer discovered his soul body showed no abnormalities. He couldn't understand the principle by which those eyes affected him. He seemed to have returned to his apprentice days. When faced with magical knowledge he didn't understand or know, he could only respond with the most terrifying emotional feedback. Why is Saul so terrifying? He could no longer describe Saul as merely powerful. The current Saul had even replaced Chief Frim as the most shocking existence in Royer's mind. Suddenly, a wisp of black flame lit up beside Royer, causing the already mentally tense Royer to quickly shift 30 meters away. Then he saw Black Flame Emperor Elo appear with several tribunal wizards. "Don't look," Royer quickly warned. But it was too late. Elo and the other wizards all saw the numerous eyes hidden in the burning blue flames. So several tribunal wizards all fell down. Only Elo, being fourth rank, was still holding on. But Royer could also see the other was significantly affected. His eyes were instantly ignited, shooting out black fire tongues. Elo quickly turned his head away and flew to Royer's side. "What is that?" Royer hesitated for a moment, finally speaking with unknown emotions. "That's Saul." Behind Saul was the entrance to the maze corridor. Now unknown what state of destruction the girl riding the bone monster had caused. But Royer couldn't care about anything else now. To forcibly enter the maze corridor and drag out the destroyer, he'd have to get past Saul, but he didn't even dare look at Saul now. How could he protect the maze corridor? Hearing Royer's words, Elo's heart also shook. He looked down at the wizards covering the ground like fallen leaves, found most were still alive, then remembered what Leah had said when she came to find him. Please consider the entire Nefrit continent, not just one person's opinion. He glanced at Leah, who had also fallen to the ground after coming with him. Although she was also staring at the monster's eyes in the sky, she was lying fairly comfortably with several human cushions beneath her. Now Elo clearly knew who was behind Leah. So Elo took a light breath. "Saul, if you can stop this state, I can guarantee no one will attack you next." The eyes on the blue flames blinked and blinked, then suddenly all closed at once, disappearing from the flames as if they had never appeared. Only the flames continued burning. When the entire scene fell quiet, the crackling sounds and burning smell became exceptionally obvious. Elo recognized it as Royer's attack spell and quickly looked at Royer. Royer didn't hesitate and immediately cast magic to dispel the spell's effect. The flames on Saul flowed like a waterfall, reconvening into a small cluster. But before Royer could withdraw the deep blue flames, he saw a hand of only black bones collect the quiet flames into a crystal bottle. "Medical fee," Saul's voice rang out. "Life-saving grace is calculated separately." A pitch-black human skeleton appeared before everyone, with only the front half of the left hand still wrapped in flesh. Bang! The maze corridor entrance that had just reappeared behind them due to Saul shrinking suddenly exploded layer by layer, black lines joyfully scattering in all directions. They drew arcs in the air before slowly falling and dissipating, as if lighting victory fireworks for Saul. Saul turned back and saw the bone dragon with Kelly, looking like a metal sculpture, appearing out of thin air. Kelly seemed to be making a charging motion. Even appearing in the sky, she was still moving rapidly forward, so she immediately shot past Saul's field of vision. But now neither Saul nor others were focused on Kelly. They all stared at the maze corridor entrance. Was what had just exploded like fireworks the maze corridor? Alo stared intently at midair. The maze corridor couldn't really be destroyed. Saul also turned back. Compared to others' tension, he had a good grasp of the situation. Sure enough, as soon as he turned, he saw a palm-sized black hollow square floating in the air. This is it. Just as Saul was about to step forward, the square suddenly burst with warm yellow light. Then Norton's figure also suddenly appeared. After appearing, he staggered twice, his face visibly deteriorating, but his brows, eyes, and mouth corners were all raised. Obviously very excited. Norton turned back, saw a black skeletal frame, was stunned at first, then quickly recognized it as Saul from the spiritual power fluctuations. Was it this brutal? Kelly, who had been ejected earlier, finally controlled the bone dragon and turned back to fly to Saul's side. She was also shocked by Saul's current appearance. Were you roasted? But now wasn't the time for explanations. Saul's only intact left hand waved, taking out a robe from the storage device in his arm to put on himself. No big problem, Saul asked Patriarch Norton. How did things go on your end? Norton was the core of this operation. Problem solved, however, Norton coughed lightly twice. I wasn't the one who contributed the most. At this time, Alo, Royer, and other conscious wizards on the periphery didn't know what had happened, but seeing only a lonely square pattern remaining in the air, they knew the maze corridor probably had major problems. But now only Alo dared step forward. The eyes Saul had mutated earlier had directly stunned all tribunal wizards. Saul, what exactly did you do? Alo, still fearing Saul's mental state was unstable, asked Norton with a serious expression. Patriarch Norton, you entered Nefret without notification and struck at Frim. Are you willing to give us an explanation for all this? Norton laughed heartily, completely unconcerned with Alo's questioning. What's done is done. Whatever explanation you want is fine, but before that, you can go see Frim and hear what he has to say. Alo was startled. He's back. Norton looked at Saul again. He wants to see you too. Kelly carefully tugged at Saul's sleeve, afraid she might break his arm. Saul turned his eyeless sockets to reassure Kelly. It's fine. Go back quickly to find Senior. Kelly had been controlling the bone dragon too long and needed to quickly find Byron to send it back. Normally, the Chaos Realm compass could only open once per day. To send the bone dragon back this time, Saul had to consume hidden crystals and magic crystals. Fortunately, the magic crystals were provided by the tribunal. Kelly was somewhat worried, but she knew she couldn't help Saul anymore now. Once the bone dragon went out of control, it would only create more trouble for Saul. So despite this being her first time meeting Norton, she hurriedly said, Lord Norton, I entrust Saul to you. After speaking, regardless of whether Norton agreed, she turned the bone dragon and flew toward the abandoned castle. Seeing Kelly leave with the bone dragon, Saul felt relieved. Then let's go see Lord Frim. Chapter 911, The Game. Time rewound to when Saul and Byron noticed Frim's figure growing faint inside the castle. At that moment, Frim had already completed his divided soul technique, only waiting for Yura to finish the final teleportation array. And Yura was enjoying dinner from the Kema Duchy with Gorsa. The two sat facing each other, and after the servants served the last dish, they withdrew from the room. Once the door closed, only the two of them remained in the room. Gorsa looked at the table full of food before him, and the golden amber wine in his cup, gradually losing interest. He leaned back against the high-backed chair, placing his hands on the white tablecloth, fingers interlaced, the smile on his face reduced to barely a trace. This should be the 7th dinner we've shared together, right? I'm tired of playing this warm family game. Time to talk about what this dead wizard's diary is really about. Yura wore a fitted red mermaid dress, its style seeming to come from Nefret continent. She sat with her back straight, neck elegant, and arms white as jade. She gracefully cut the food on her plate with knife and fork, appearing both intellectual and beautiful. But the scattered fragments covering the floor revealed that her state wasn't as stable as she was currently presenting. Hearing Gorsa's inquiry, Yura didn't stop her movements. She put a piece of meat with blood streaks into her mouth, gently wiped her lips, then leisurely replied, "I don't know what the dead wizard's diary is, but I heard that your little apprentice was able to rapidly become a high-rank wizard despite insufficient innate magical talent precisely because he had this magical tool." Gorsa shrugged. "That's because I taught him well." Yura could no longer maintain her elegant composure. She slammed her knife and fork on the table with a bang, even shattering a plate. "You taught him well. What did you teach him?" Gorsa showed no shame whatsoever. "I taught him how to survive in the wizard world." He narrowed his eyes. "Oh right, I also secretly protected him, and you were the bodyguard." Yura shot up, her suddenly straightened legs knocking the high-backed chair to the ground. "I'm not joking with you." Gorsa tilted his head. "But you're wasting my time." Seeing Yura about to reflexively retort, he suddenly pointed at her lips from afar, then said, "You used the name of a diary to lure me to Kema Duchy, but every time I ask you about matters related to the diary, you use it as a condition to demand I play house with you. Yura, have you forgotten you're still a wizard?" Yura's eyes widened, fury seeming ready to burst from them. "And you also like acting. From the first day, you've demanded I come here to dine with you daily, and every day you'd smash plates all over the floor. Are you trying to cover up some traces or set up some array?" Gorsa looked sideways at the carpet beneath his feet, covered with plate fragments and food scraps. The carpet's patterns were chaotic, perfect for hiding some secret array. "Dawdling and being secretive, your approach reminds me of someone." "I'm going to kill you." Yura finally broke the silencing spell on her mouth, sweeping all the plates at hand toward Gorsa. The plates flew through the air with meat and grease, then suddenly froze mid-flight. Black shadows rustled across the table and floor. These black shadows turned into tiny fragments, flowing toward Yura, while the overhead light suddenly concentrated its rays on Gorsa. It was as if light and shadow brushed past each other, each heading for their designated enemy, splitting the room in two. Gorsa was in the light, Yura in the darkness. But suddenly brilliant light blazed forth, instantly devouring all shadows. Those tiny, active little black shadows all vanished with a hiss, turning to smoke. Even the smoke was white. Gorsa felt that, in just the blink of an eye, the world before him had become a mass of light. He smiled slightly, advancing instead of retreating, charging directly toward the brightest source of light. Dark attribute elemental particles continuously gathered on his body, as if collecting all shadows in the room to fight against the light before him. But suddenly, violent magical fluctuations came from beneath his feet, as if a huge void had appeared. Strong suction force emerged from the void, forcibly pulling away the black shadows on Gorsa's body. Gorsa's charge toward the light halted. "Aurora Realm." He glanced down, and though he couldn't see Yura's figure before him, he still spoke toward where Yura had been standing. "You're activating this magical array. Do you want everyone in Kema Royal Palace to die with you?" "Gorsa, can't you see the situation clearly? Now it's you who will die with me." Yura's voice came from the brightest light overhead. The light in the room had become so intense it distorted vision. The concentrated light generated heat, while making Gorsa feel his skin beginning to burn painfully. Those lights were like tiny threadworms, desperately trying to burrow into Gorsa's pores, forcing him to use magical power to counter the damage they inflicted. But the dark attribute magical power around him kept disappearing. Gorsa knew that if this continued, there would soon be no dark attribute magical power left for him to mobilize. "So that's how it is. But he wasn't anxious. You want to use Aurora Realm to affect the surrounding magical power, making this a space without dark attributes, causing light-dark imbalance in my body, hopping to make me mutate because of it. You figured it out immediately, as expected. Yura's voice became calm again, apparently believing Gorsa was doomed today. You were always that smart, always knowing what I wanted to do. When I chose to abandon my body back then, that was your doing too, wasn't it? You actually killed me, didn't you? You actually killed me. You killed me. Yura's voice grew increasingly agitated, her tone beginning to distort. Gorsa remained silent, apparently disdaining to explain. His gaze turned around the room, recalling where the door and windows were. Though he had moved to many different positions during the brief battle, he could still maintain his sense of direction. But just as Gorsa was about to turn, his body suddenly felt a strong, attractive force, compelling him to turn back. Another high-rank array. No wonder she needed so many days to prepare. You can't escape, he. Yura's voice became cheerful again. I kept you here so many days just for this soul-tethering technique to take effect. Now as long as I don't leave this room, you can never walk out. Can't escape anymore. Gorsa simply stopped trying to escape. He didn't even attempt to approach the light source anymore, just stood in place. You kept me here so many days mainly to wait for Frym, right? The chattering Yura suddenly fell silent. But Gorsa kept asking, Frym, are you hiding behind Yura? You want to kill me so badly, yet you hide behind a woman. Can't the tribunal do things openly and honestly for once? Gorsa, Frym's cold voice finally replaced Yura's. You always know how to anger me. Gorsa laughed with great joy. Of course I know. You've already surrendered to the Abyssal Eye. That's enough. Frym actually interrupted Gorsa directly, not letting him finish, followed by an even more intense burst of light. Almost instantly, Gorsa could see nothing before him. Aurora Realm maximum power. Once this intensity of light attribute magic fully deployed, it could directly vaporize all living beings within 1,000 meters. For a moment, Gorsa could almost hear the sound of stones evaporating, but soon he couldn't hear anything either. Light seemed to replace all 5 senses, leaving his consciousness able to perceive only this one element. Finally, in an environment of extreme dark attribute scarcity and extreme light attribute saturation, Gorsa, whose foundation was based on light-dark balance and conversion, suddenly began to mutate. His body surface suddenly burst with a layer of black, then dissipated in an instant. All shadows on his body, like moisture being evaporated, disappeared from within him. Frym hadn't directly attacked Gorsa, but Gorsa would become distorted and imbalanced due to the Aurora Realm Frym created, subsequently mutating. Once Gorsa died, Frym would clean up thoroughly. Even if Norton knew who the real killer was, there would be no evidence. Just when Frym thought victory was assured, Gorsa spoke again. His vocal cords were also mutating, his voice eerie and harsh, as if mixed with rotting flesh, but he still spoke. Frym, sometimes you're not crazy enough. Hada. Chapter 912, Counter. He kept laughing and laughing, his mouth stretching wider and wider, almost reaching 270 degrees, while his brain seemed to shrink to the size of a walnut. His body was shrinking while his head swelled grotesquely, his mouth taking up 90% of his body. He seemed to have completely mutated. But seeing Gorsa in this state, Frym's soul body suddenly jolted. His heart felt uneasy, unable to settle. Something's wrong. Just as he realized this, he saw Gorsa, who appeared to have already mutated, suddenly lunge forward, advancing 10 meters in the blink of an eye, directly reaching the light source he had been unable to approach before. His mouth expanded to the size of a table, revealed teeth twisted beyond recognition into sharp points, and he bit down. Like a crocodile that had been lurking for ages, biting at its buffalo prey. Hum! Frim's divided soul that had descended here convulsed violently. Though he hadn't cried out in pain, the fluctuation caused all low-rank wizards nearby who sensed it to writhe and collapse. Gorsa bit down but didn't immediately tear off a piece of the divided spirit. Instead, he shook his head wildly, trying to tear away a piece of Frim's soul through brute force. "You're not third rank." Frim finally discovered the anomaly, his voice trembling. "The mutations on your body, they're all your disguise." Gorsa bit onto Frim, fighting like a mad beast in the most primitive life-or-death struggle. He couldn't speak, but his constantly twisting head vividly expressed his excitement and exhilaration. Frim understood he had been counter-ambushed. Although he had already teleported half his divided soul here, he still couldn't kill Gorsa, who had just reached 4th rank. The other party had set up this trap long ago, waiting for him to walk into it. He didn't have time for regret, only wanting to retreat immediately. It wasn't that he couldn't stay and fight Gorsa to the death. After all, Gorsa had just advanced and couldn't compare to him yet. But Gorsa was clearly prepared, and he had to guard against this madman having other trump cards. Since the plan to kill Gorsa could no longer be achieved, there was no need to waste more time. However, just as Frim wanted to sever his connection with Yura and return to the maze corridor, he discovered that the passage back had been twisted by another force. Even though he had split half his power to come here while leaving the other half in the maze corridor, no one else could bypass him to twist the connection and prevent this half of his divided soul from returning. That could only mean a 4th rank had intervened. Frim immediately thought of one person. Norton, how dare he? Frim's voice contained both anger and disbelief. Crack! Just as Frim was shocked, Gorsa finally tore away a strand of Frim's soul and swallowed it down his throat. That soul fragment containing extremely pure light attribute energy was as scalding as a red-hot coal, but Gorsa still swallowed it without changing expression. Then his hoarse voice sounded. "So you see, you're not crazy enough. For your goals, you can secretly violate the covenants of 2 continents, but I'm different. I do things openly." Gorsa kindly explained, then opened his even more grotesquely enlarged mouth and bit down again. When Saul and Alo entered the maze corridor, now only one level remained, and saw Frim, both were greatly shocked. That Frim who had once been incredibly proud throughout all of Nefret, even the entire wizard world, acting independently and authoritatively, was now sitting dejectedly on the ground, his back against the corridor wall. Some arrogance remained in his eyes, but his expression was extremely haggard. Frim raised his eyes, first scanning over Saul before finally settling on Alo. "Stuart is with me." He actually admitted it just like that. Alo wanted to be angry, but he knew this wasn't the time. After Leah had informed him about Stuart's situation, he quickly verified the intelligence. It was just that Stuart was still in the other party's hands, and he wasn't certain of Frim's purpose, so he temporarily restrained himself, wanting to use other methods to force Frim to hand over Stuart. Alo's reaction also showed Frim that the other party wasn't surprised, seemingly having known about this matter long ago. Frim narrowed his eyes. "You already knew about this, so you joined with Norton against me." "I won't do anything detrimental to Nefret." Alo said only one sentence. He disdained wasting words on explanations. And he believed Frim could understand. Yes, Frim also figured it out. It seems changes have occurred on the Stargate Council's side too. Which is why Norton would disregard everything and directly enter Nefret. Behind the Stargate, it's indeed not simple. "Alo, I'll return Stuart to you. The tribunal will also be handed over to you from now on. only you would absolutely never harm Nefrit's interests for other continents. Many people in Alau's Black Flame Empire had some blood relation to him. Alau was protecting his country, and even more so protecting his family. If someone unfamiliar with Alau heard this, they would never imagine he was someone who valued family ties so much. Not at all like a wizard. But paradoxically, it was exactly such a person who had reached fourth rank. Alau glanced at Saul before asking Frim, "When you went to Stat, you encountered an ambush." Alau still wasn't clear on the specific situation. Norton was here. Could it be that the one who ambushed Frim in Stat Continent was Alec? But Frim gave an answer that Alau hadn't expected yet was completely reasonable. Gorsa has already advanced to fourth rank. Alau was first stunned, then sighed. He still became fourth rank, but will fourth rank Gorsa really bring the destructive disaster to the world that you believe? Saul, listening to their conversation from the side, frowned. Why would Frim think Master Gorsa would bring disaster? And destructive disaster at that. But Frim didn't intend to explain this matter. For the remaining matters, I'd like to talk with Saul alone. Alau glanced at Saul again, showing no objection. If it were him before, he definitely wouldn't care about a third-rank wizard from another faction. But now, just recalling Saul's form covered in eyes made his soul body continuously oscillate. So he didn't pursue the matter curiously, but took the soul that floated over from Frim's hand and quickly left the maze corridor. Frim had thought he'd need to spend more effort persuading Alau to leave, but unexpectedly the other party was so straightforward. He seemed to be wary of Saul. Frim looked at Saul with a complex expression. "You're even more complicated than I previously imagined, or perhaps it's the credit of your dead wizard's diary. Maybe I should have killed you after all. Even if I couldn't get the diary, I shouldn't let such a powerful thing fall into enemy hands." Saul didn't speak. Even if he said today's events actually had little to do with the diary, the other party might not believe him, so he wouldn't explain. "I just can't understand why your name has never appeared," Frim said in a low voice. This time Saul was confused. "My name appeared on what?" Chapter 913, The New Golden Pay. "This ambush against me was jointly planned by you and Gorsa, wasn't it?" "My master didn't tell me the specific plan, but Lord Norton contacted me and asked for my cooperation. However, I slightly modified the plan. From collaborator to mastermind, directly destroying most of the maze corridor and making Frim completely lose his foundation for controlling the tribunal." Saul had long suspected that the maze corridor was precisely Frim's foundation for becoming fourth rank, his reliance for resurrection. But Saul hadn't planned to completely destroy the maze corridor, because the tribunal needed Frim, and Nefrit also needed Frim. It was just that even if Frim didn't have to die, he could no longer obtain freedom. Before entering, Saul had already reached an agreement with Alau. Frim would be trapped forever in this small square space, but Alau would take him to the Red Sea coast. Whenever the black tide struck, they would have Frim use his own power to activate the defensive arrays. Didn't Frim want to protect Nefrit? Then let him focus wholeheartedly on protection, without having the mind to meddle in other affairs. Presumably for the sake of Nefrit Continent, even if Frim felt stifled and resentful in his heart, he would still contribute all his strength when the black tide came. This was Saul's revenge. Didn't Frim force others to protect Nefrit? Then let him be forced once too. Frim clearly understood what plan Saul had modified. After all, nearly half of his divided soul had gone into Gorsa's belly. Only a tiny amount had escaped back to his original body after Norton stopped blocking the return passage. Even as a fourth-rank wizard, after losing nearly half his soul, he would suffer severe injuries and nearly mutate. At this moment, Frim didn't even know what kind of mood he should be in. He looked up slightly at Saul. It seems only you are the suitable candidate. Starting with riddles again, Saul frowned inwardly. Norton originally only had a few decades to live. After today's situation, he probably has less than 10 years left. Saul frowned upon hearing this, not expecting Patriarch Norton to consume his own lifespan for Master Gorsa. But thinking about it, it made sense. Master Gorsa was the future hope of the entire Glare family. Patriarch Norton would rather sacrifice his life than allow others to harm Master Gorsa. Frem acted secretively when making his move, but the Glare family struck back recklessly. If Patriarch Norton hadn't directly violated the covenant and personally landed on Nefret, Saul wouldn't have been able to seize this opportunity to directly overturn Frem. Frem knew what Saul was thinking, but he said nothing. He had already recovered from the dejection of being outmaneuvered and losing everything. He spoke slowly. The Stargate Council's mind isn't on the Stargate at all. Elo is constrained by human emotions. Murphy can't leave the sighing wall. Gorsa, HMPH. I now hope he'll be able to return alive in the future. What? Saul asked. Where is my master going? A flash of mockery passed through Frem's eyes, but it quickly returned to calm. He's going to the Abyssal Eye. Saul's eyes widened. That Abyssal Eye, just looking at it from afar, made him feel terrified. When Frem had thrown him into the black tide nearby, he had nearly mutated. How could Master Gorsa choose to go there? But soon, Saul figured it out himself. Master Gorsa wants to personally witness the terror of the Abyssal Eye. After all, the Abyssal Eye is like an arrow hanging over all our heads. But if we don't even understand the essence of the Abyssal Eye, how can we talk about solving this source of doomsday? You're thinking too simplistically. Do you know that once the Abyssal Eye erupts, it will swallow at least one continent, possibly even two? Saul fell silent. He had thought about this, but would doing nothing prevent the Abyssal Eye from erupting? The increasingly frequent Storm Eye eruptions in the borderland over these years, didn't that mean the Abyssal Eye was becoming more and more active? And there was Camus. She clearly knew that one day the Abyssal Eye would completely erupt. If nothing was done, everything was just a matter of time. I trust my master, Saul said only one sentence. Frem wouldn't believe anything more, and he was too lazy to explain. HMPH, Frem snorted coldly. Then take a look at this thing. He suddenly raised his hand, and the entire corridor suddenly dimmed. Then a point of golden light appeared overhead. It was a golden thread that slowly descended under Frem's guidance. This is why I cannot tolerate Gorsa. The names appearing on this golden thread will all bring near-destructive disasters to the wizard world. Frem pointed to each name, telling Saul what they had done, what harm they had brought, and how he had begun clearing the people on the list after figuring out the golden thread's purpose. Coming to the last name, Saul was shocked to see Gorsa Glare written there. Gorsa's action of entering the Abyssal Eye will only bring disaster to the wizard world. Now I can no longer stop him. I know you won't allow me to leave the maze corridor either. So now I'm handing it over to you. When you understand that everything I've said is true, you'll make a move against Gorsa yourselves. Frem looked confident as he pushed the golden thread with several names written on it toward Saul. Saul took the golden thread. Just as he was about to examine it closely before putting it away, he discovered the thread had suddenly disappeared. His movement paused, and he immediately began searching for where the thread had gone. His mental power searched his entire body and actually found it in the dead wizard's diary. The golden thread had remarkably transformed into a golden page. This was Saul's first golden page that he hadn't obtained from Kismet. After confirming the page was safely in the diary without any unusual movement, Saul pretended to store the item in his storage device, then said to Frem, who had been staring at him, "I'll take this thing, but I need to carefully verify whether what you said is true. And even if it is true, I won't necessarily act according to your previous style." Frym leaned against the wall, but his waist and back remained straight, as if his pride hadn't been broken by this defeat. "That's not something a prisoner like me can influence. However, I believe that when you become a fourth-rank wizard, you'll be the most likely person to make the right choice." Saul was silent for a moment. "His Majesty Alo has agreed to imprison you in the Red Sea." Frym closed his eyes. "Heh, I understand. You can rest assured, even if it's for Nefret, I won't let the black tide invade the southeastern coast. You should pay more attention to the far north instead." Frym opened his eyes a crack. Although Murphy doesn't have Norton's signs of demise, he has been fourth rank for a very, very long time. We are all people who have lost the path to advancement. We will all reach the end of our lives someday. If Murphy dies, which fourth-rank wizard would be willing to be trapped forever within the Sighing Wall? Chapter 914, The Diary's Secret. Alo's gaze remained fixed on the square. He still wasn't clear about Norton's physical condition, but while the Stargate Council still had 2 fourth-rank wizards, Frym couldn't die yet. Norton didn't do anything unnecessary. The 3 of them went together to the Red Sea coast and embedded the square containing Frym's seal into the defensive array. In the short term, Frym couldn't leave this place and could only transmit power to the defensive array through the seal. After confirming that Frym couldn't escape from inside for several decades, Norton finally withdrew and handed control of this place back to Alo. Alo stepped forward and tightly gripped the core of the defensive array that concerned the entire southeastern coast, his emotions complex. Even keeping Frym confined like this, he will eventually recover. When that time comes, I won't keep him imprisoned anymore. The corner of Norton's mouth turned up, though he didn't look particularly happy. What happens then is no longer my concern. By that time, he would long since be gone. The Glare family would have been handed over to Gorsa, and who knew if the Stargate Council would even still exist? Naturally, he couldn't manage Frym anymore. Everything he had done today was merely to give Gorsa and the Glare family a chance to continue existing. Norton left quickly, and Alo turned to look at Saul. Saul noticed Alo's complex gaze and smiled. "You don't need to worry about me. I'm just protecting myself. When facing the black tide, I also stand with the tribunal. Although I was imprisoned these past few days, I thought of a method for cultivating Mido. I was just about to find Royer to discuss it." Saul stepped toward the exit, then heard Alo behind him say, "Royer is still unconscious. He probably wouldn't dare get out of bed if he saw you right now." Saul stumbled slightly, then pretended nothing had happened and walked out. He had momentarily forgotten that to buy time earlier, he had been forced to release his star-shaped eyes. The effect was so strong that even he himself had been shocked. Fortunately, those stars still obeyed his commands and returned when told to. Thinking this, Saul had already teleported to Royer's side. He had previously placed a temporary displacement coordinate on Royer. Then Saul saw Royer, who was resting with his eyes closed, had a 7-colored pupilled eye right in the center of his forehead, looking around curiously. When the 7-colored eye saw Saul, it seemed guilty and quickly shrank back into Royer's forehead, leaving no trace on the skin. Saul. Only then did Royer sense someone entering his resting room. He quickly opened his eyes and, seeing it was Saul, felt somewhat embarrassed. It was probably the kind of embarrassment one feels after talking tough only to be knocked unconscious with one punch. Although the tribunal hadn't completely changed hands yet, half of it had. Even Royer wasn't sure whether Emperor Alo could withstand the combined force of Saul and Norton. After all, wizards were never a group whose strength was measured by numbers. "I came to talk to you about Mido. Earlier, when I was researching the problem of Mido's growth limits in the abandoned castle, I suddenly realized I had fallen into a thinking trap. She's clearly an inverted tree. Saul told Royer the suggestions that should have originally come from Mido herself, just as he had discussed experiments with Royer in the Evernight Royal Palace before. Royer had originally been feeling embarrassed, but hearing Saul discuss a bunch of magical terminology and formulas, his thoughts were drawn to the Black Sea Tree experiments, temporarily forgetting about Chief Frim's matter. After the two sat in the room discussing enthusiastically for quite a while, Saul finally stood up again. "I've told you all the details I thought of. I'll be going to the borderland later. If you have any new discoveries or questions, you can use your tribunal's communication methods to notify me." Only then did Royer remember that Saul was now one of the rebels who had overthrown Frim. However, he could also tell that Saul had no intention of staying with the tribunal to enjoy the fruits of victory. "What about Chief Frim?" Saul shrugged. "Currently he'll focus on protecting the Red Sea. It's not far from you either. For specific details, you should ask Emperor Alo. You'll probably be very busy during this period." After explaining matters concerning Mido, Saul finally had time to return to the abandoned castle where he had originally been imprisoned. Kelly and Byron, who had been staying there, quickly came out to greet him. Byron was seeing Saul in this skeletal state for the first time. He froze for a moment, then fell back behind Kelly. "How did it go?" Kelly quickly asked. "Temporarily stable, though it depends on Emperor Alo's arrangements afterward. But it probably won't have much to do with us anymore." Byron listened quietly. Seeing that Kelly wanted to ask more questions, he gave her a meaningful look. Although he was also curious, he felt that Saul's current state wasn't particularly good. Only then did Kelly change the subject. "Should we return first or rest first?" Saul had gone all out in battle and had even lost his human form. After thinking about it, he decided to show weakness in front of his two closest friends. "Help me keep watch. I need to recover." Both nodded repeatedly, letting Saul enter the castle interior to rest while they remained outside the room, watching for any disturbances in the surroundings. Saul stayed in the room, first meditating for a day and night to stabilize his spiritual body, then sleeping for another day and night before finally feeling like his empty skull was growing a brain again. Once his body had completely recovered and he had returned to being that black-haired, gray-eyed youth, he finally took out the golden page he had obtained days ago to examine it. This golden page was different from all the ones Kismet had given him. The other pages were normal paper thickness, but the page obtained from Frim was as thick as cardboard. When Saul's finger slid across it, the page would display flowing, iridescent light, very beautiful. Why did this golden page appear in Frim's hands? And why was it in the form of a golden thread? What relationship does this golden thread have with the black lines extending from the white pages? Saul looked at the well-behaved hardcover book in his hands. Every time he felt he had mastered the dead wizard's diary, it seemed to reveal even more hidden secrets. Saul tried to activate the golden page the same way he activated the power of the white pages, but there was no response. It seemed it could still only work as before, performing scenario previews when Saul encountered mortal crises. With such a thick page, if I encounter another crisis involving fourth-rank wizards, would it be able to provide warnings several more times? This was the only guess he could make for now. That Kismet fellow, could it be that every golden page he gave me was an incomplete version? No, that's not right. The first golden page I obtained wasn't given to me voluntarily by him, but was snatched from his hands by the diary. So there must be other causes that can form this kind of thick golden page. What exactly is the difference? Saul tried several methods to activate other functions of the golden page, but could still only watch the page glow. Frim could see several names, but I can't even see the names. Should I go ask Frim how he did it? But after thinking about it, Saul gave up. If Frim knew how to make the page change, he wouldn't have hidden the golden thread in the deepest level of the maze corridor, preventing anyone from seeing it. Forget it, I'll research it when I get back, or find an opportunity to ask Kismet. That guy knows a lot. Chapter 915, Former Master. Yura sat with her head bowed in the room. This room was located in a tower of Kema Royal Palace Castle. It was a new residence that Kira had specially prepared for her after regaining control of the entire palace. The room was luxuriously decorated, with windows on all four sides offering views of the outside scenery. But Yura couldn't leave. Kira had used magic to completely seal the entire room, with only small food supplies able to be delivered inside. Therefore, although this room was luxurious and had beautiful views, it was essentially a prison cell. No matter how much one might pity Yura's situation, Kira could never set her free. Because Yura had cooperated with Frim to set an ambush for Gorsa, causing all the ordinary people who had remained in the castle that day to suffer intense light attribute radiation. Half of them died directly in that disaster, and the remaining survivors were all afflicted with illness. They were all Kira's subjects. Yura didn't care about them, but Kira did. Kira dispatched court wizards to treat these ordinary people, while also sending people into the royal city to check if anyone else had been harmed. Fortunately, Gorsa had counterattacked quickly that day, and the Aurora realm hadn't spread too far, or the entire royal capital might have become a ghost town. This made Kira, who learned the details afterward, feel a chill of fear. After imprisoning Yura, she had visited her once. At that time, Yura had maintained this same posture of keeping her head down without speaking. Today, Gorsa had finally left Kema Duchy, so Kira came to visit Yura again. Noticing the figure outside the window, Yura slowly raised her head. Her face was pale, her expression numb. Looking at Kira, she seemed to be asking, "When are you going to kill me?" Although Gorsa had devoured most of Frim's divided soul that day, he hadn't harmed Yura. He had simply sealed all her abilities and handed her over to Kira, who had been rescued by Shea and Kelly. Kira also didn't know how Gorsa wanted to deal with Yura, and after the battle, Gorsa had been in deep meditation, digesting the extremely pure light attribute magical power he had obtained from Frim's divided soul. Only just now had he emerged from his secluded room. After a brief conversation with Kira, he had left as if nothing had happened. Kira had come to convey Gorsa's decision to Yura. He said not to kill you, so from now on I'll keep you imprisoned here. Yura, who had shown no emotion before, slowly raised her head. He won't kill me. Why? I don't know why either. Maybe you're still useful, maybe. Maybe he still loves me. Yura's eyes suddenly began to shine. Kira pressed her lips together. She thought Yura was very, very foolish. How could Gorsa have feelings? He had even hidden his advancement to 4th rank from most people around him. What could be trusted about him? But Yura wouldn't listen to any of this, so Kira simply said, "Think whatever you want. Anyway, Gorsa has already left. He probably won't come to Kema again in the future." Yura was stunned and actually asked, "Why?" Kira pressed her lips together briefly. "I think it's because you're no longer useful." Kira thought Yura would be disappointed or go crazy, but Yura just sneered and completely disbelieved Kira's words. "I wanted to kill him and I did try to do so, but he won't kill me, he didn't even harm me." Yura sat back down, still smiling at the corners of her mouth. "He loves me." Looking at Yura deceiving herself like this, Kira had nothing to say. She always felt that this Yura wasn't the sister who had been so passionate about magic in the past, but everyone else told her she was. "If you all say so, then so be it." Kira turned around, looking at the peaceful city-state before her in the sunset. Anyway, I probably won't be useful anymore either. Do you need me to escort you back? When leaving Evernight, Norton asked Saul this. No need. No one should dare to stop us now. Saul respectfully bid farewell to Norton. The other party was Master Gorsa's elder, and also his elder. This time, he had also helped Saul escape from Frim's confinement. Looking at Saul, Norton's heart was filled with emotion. Although he had originally told Saul to stay outside, he had actually intended for Saul to lead him to find the maze corridor and then immediately withdraw. After all, in Norton's mind, how could a third-rank wizard possibly resist the tribunal's attack? He had planned to spend his remaining time cooperating with Gorsa to ambush Frim and prevent his divided soul from escaping back, while simultaneously using the terrain advantage inside the maze corridor to resist attacks from other tribunal wizards, including Alo. Doing this, he was confident of success, but the cost would be that his life might only have 3 or 4 years left. But Saul had changed the plan. He wanted to help Norton block the external attacks while also destroying most of Frim's foundation, further extending the time Frim would need to recover his strength. This way, with only Alo remaining as a free 4th-rank wizard, and given how protective he was, he wouldn't make moves against the Glare family afterward, and Norton's consumption would be much less. Therefore, Norton could now live another 8 to 10 years. Regardless, I still have to thank you. This is the Glare family emblem. If you ever need anything, you can activate the emblem, and my clan members will reach your side as quickly as possible. Saul carefully accepted the emblem. It was a cluster of bright light that transformed into a light cluster pattern on Saul's palm when he received it. Saul examined it carefully. There was only pure energy on it, with no mental power response. Then I thank you very much. There's one more thing I need to remind you of. Unless this world is about to be destroyed, don't cross through the Stargate unless absolutely necessary. Saul was secretly shocked. Wasn't the Stargate Council currently planning to cross through the Stargate to leave this sealed wizard world? Why was the Glare Patriarch advising him against it? Had he discovered some problem with the Stargate Council? However, Norton didn't reveal more about the Stargate Council's affairs. He watched as Saul, Kelly, and Byron stepped into the ultra-long-distance teleportation array, his face gradually showing a worried expression. Gorsa, I can't stop you, but can you really return from the Abyssal Eye before I disappear? If you die there, do I really have to hand over the Glare family to Saul? Norton closed his eyes, hiding the pain in his heart. Although Saul is an excellent wizard, he's only 3rd rank now. How can such a person resist the final doomsday? I can't see any hope. Maybe this is why I can't continue living. Sigh. Just as the dust was settling on the tribunal's upheaval, Kismet was awakening from unconsciousness. Smallcap chapter is updated by Novi Fire, Smallcap NET. He braced himself against the ground, feeling the sticky sensation of blood on his palms, then slowly sat up. Looking down, he saw that everything below his chest had melted into blood plasma. When he sat up, the wound's cross-section directly touched the ground. Pain seemed to want to travel along his nerves to his brain, but was forcibly interrupted by some mysterious power. Kismet actually laughed. He ran his hand through his silver hair, not caring at all about getting the disgusting blood plasma in his hair. Soon, his body was lifted by newly grown silver bones, followed by flesh covering the skeleton. He became a complete person again. Kismet snapped his fingers and instantly put on a gorgeous silver formal outfit. Only the blood plasma on the ground didn't decrease, and red blood still dripped from his hair. Kismet looked left and right but didn't see Ophelia, who should have been beside him. She was probably the blood water he was stepping on now. Her recovery might still need some time. Kismet didn't bother with Ophelia and walked forward a few steps to a dark light circle. This light circle was very strange. The edges were bright, but the center was utterly dark. Nothing could be seen, and anything put into it could never be retrieved. Kismet extended his right hand into the dark center. When he pulled it out, only a bare wrist remained of his arm. Blood spurted poof from the break, but before it could spray for long, it was blocked by newly grown bone and skin. This gap in the world barrier is dangerous, but it does connect to the outside. But the outside world is so vast, can our signal really be transmitted out? No one answered Kismet, nor did he expect anyone to answer him. But just as Kismet was about to turn back and piece Ophelia back together, a voice suddenly came from the dark center of the light circle. "Long time no see, Kismet." Kismet froze in place as if turned to ice. Only after his heart stubbornly beat 300 times did he turn around very slowly. "Long time no see, Douglas, my former master." Chapter 916, 3 Years. This time upon his return, he no longer concealed the fact that he had advanced to 4th rank. Therefore, on his way back, countless jaws dropped in shock. Murphy appeared directly on the sighing wall. Seeing Gorsa emanating the oppressive aura unique to 4th rank wizards, he showed little surprise. "It seems you were the more skillful one after all." Gorsa walked up the steps of the sighing wall, his eyes curved in a smile, as relaxed as if he had just returned from a leisurely outing. "It's just a matter of who's more willing to go all out." Norton made his move. "Oh, is he still alive?" "His path has been severed. Right now it's hard to say if he's dead or alive. He's just holding on for the sake of his family." Murphy's aged face seemed to gain a few more wrinkles. He looked around at the towering sighing wall, watching the wizards coming and going on the wall. He let out a sigh. "Who isn't doing the same?" Murphy didn't ask about Frim's fate. When Frim had asked him to lure Gorsa out, he had agreed. But he also hadn't informed Frim about Gorsa's suspected advancement to 4th rank. The choice had been made back then. There was no helping it. Old men like him probably just preferred energetic young people like Gorsa. Although counting Gorsa's age, he wasn't exactly young anymore. But as long as he still had fighting spirit in his heart, still had hope, still had a path ahead of him, then he was a young person. Gorsa returned to his wizard tower outside the sighing wall, with several wizards following him up, probably wanting to pledge allegiance. Murphy didn't go. He simply leaned on his staff, nodding and greeting the wizards who passed by, then walked to the highest point of the sighing wall, sat on the battlements and gazed toward the distant ocean. Gorsa had advanced to 4th rank, but he wouldn't recruit others or build new forces, because the first thing he wanted to do after advancing was to explore the Abyssal Eye. Murphy had tried to dissuade him before, but couldn't change his mind, so he stopped trying. He sat on the battlements, feeling the salty sea breeze and the rough wall beneath him, and let out a heavy sigh. If Norton can risk his family's future to indulge Gorsa's willfulness, why can't I? Murphy looked down. Below his feet were the churning seas, the black pollution sources, the busy wizards, and the toiling, ordinary people. It was this sighing wall that had stood in the far north for over 100 years. 3 years passed in the blink of an eye. Saul stood at the top floor of the Purity Wizard Tower, gazing toward Rhine City in the distance. Under the wizard's super-efficient construction, Rhine City had transformed from a small town that originally depended on the Purity Wizard Tower into a massive city with 4 satellite towns, 2 layers of magnificent city walls, and a moat. Previously, probably no one could have imagined that such a huge city could appear within the borderland. Even now, some people believed that Rhine City would soon become the Rhine Kingdom. It just depended on whether Saul wanted to claim the throne. He was a third-rank wizard, and the strongest below fourth rank. What worldly power couldn't he have if he wanted it? The battle at the tribunal had gradually spread to all three continents. Saul's reputation had risen again, and he was now recognized by the world as a top-tier powerhouse. However, Saul had no intention of building his own faction. The wizard world was ultimately a world that emphasized individual strength. No matter how prosperous a faction was, once it lost its top-tier combat power, it would immediately be devoured by others. Just like Kina's, which had once been hostile to the Kema Duchy. After losing all its second-rank wizards, it had now disintegrated. Part was annexed by Kema, part scattered into numerous small factions, and part of the wasteland was occupied by barbarians. Saul also learned that the Glare family seemed to be experiencing some turmoil. Probably the news that Norton's time was running short had been leaked. Now the remaining third-rank wizards in the family were also beginning to stir. They shouldn't compete for the patriarch position, since although Gorsa was still at the Sighing Wall, everyone knew he would be the next patriarch. So currently, these third-rank wizards were only fighting for power and benefits after the patriarch changed. But Saul knew that Gorsa would enter the Abyssal Eye, along with the receding black tide, when the next black tide came. At that time, the Glare family probably wouldn't be so peaceful. No matter when, as long as there were people, there would be conflict, in prosperous times and in apocalyptic times alike. Knock, knock, knock. The sound of knocking interrupted Saul's thoughts. Come in. Steward Hope pushed open the door. Tower Master, Lord Byron has packed his luggage and is ready to depart. Saul nodded. I'll go see him off. Byron had stayed at the Purity Wizard Tower for many years, researching the inertization formula and reverse inertization formula together with Saul. Now they had successfully used these two formulas to resolve a real storm eye eruption. The inertization spell directly sealed the storm eye, without even needing to use the resources provided by the Tribunal and Stargate Council. Of course, those resources were later kept by Saul for magical research. Although the inertization formula still couldn't handle large-scale black tide attacks, it could be used as an emergency measure for small-scale pollution crises. This storm eye was resolved in a very short time, allowing several wizard factions to see the value of the inertization formula, and they all sought to purchase it. Saul had no intention of monopolizing the inertization formula and sold it to the Tribunal and the Sighing Wall. After they experimented and achieved pleasing results, even the long-silent Stargate Council sought to purchase a copy from Saul. When selling the inertization formula before, both factions had sent people for material exchanges, but the Stargate Council asked Saul to send someone over. This request was somewhat strange. However, after thinking about it, Saul still agreed. But when he wanted to send a first-rank wizard from the tower to complete the transaction, Byron volunteered to go help Saul complete the deal. Strangely, upon hearing this news, Agu also stepped forward, wanting to go with Byron. Saul readily agreed. Now, except for Bait, who was still confined by him, the other consciousness bodies in the diary could do whatever they wanted. Even leaving the diary was fine. Especially Agu. When he was first subdued, Saul had promised to give him freedom after 100 years. Now Saul's advancement speed had exceeded his own expectations, and the diary had officially recognized him as master. Naturally, he didn't need to wait 100 years and could free Agu now. However, considering the current world situation, going elsewhere wasn't as good as staying at the Purity Wizard Tower, so they all hadn't left. Since Agu rarely had a place he wanted to go, Saul naturally let him go. Of course, before agreeing, Saul had used the diary to predict for both of them and found no death warnings. Otherwise, Saul wouldn't have been so at ease. Today happened to be the day Byron was leaving with Agu. After receiving the steward's message, Saul immediately went downstairs to see them off. When Saul reached the bottom of the tower, Kelly also rushed down in a flurry. I'm here. Give this to you, I just finished making it. Kelly threw Byron a sealed crystal ring containing a drop of golden liquid with fine sparkles that kept flowing inside. What is this? Saul was seeing this for the first time too. The liquid form of Alpha Plus, Kelly said proudly. Despite being a young woman in her 20s, she still acted like the little tsundere from before. Something I developed over these 2 years. Senior can take it with him. If you encounter danger, just throw it out and run. I guarantee even third-rank enemies won't have time to chase you. Thank you. Byron still showed no expression as he accepted the crystal ring, but stored it very solemnly. This solemnity came partly from gratitude for Kelly's concern, and partly because he was quite afraid of Alpha Plus radiation. Chapter 917, The Black Tide Returns. Saul still remembered Kismet's advice from back then, treating the Stargate Council as his last stop, which was why he didn't go with Byron. Although Kismet was unreliable, he also possessed many secrets. Most importantly, Saul had his own arrangements. Byron honestly told Saul, "The half-elf mentioned that something seems to have happened over there, but it might be beneficial for my advancement, so he asked me to go take a look." The half-elf. Saul didn't like the half-elf consciousness hidden within Senior Byron's body, but now Senior Byron needed the half-elf to guide his path to advancement. The Stargate Council has been suddenly quiet for so many years. They're obviously not just researching crossing through the Stargate. The situation over there is probably quite complex too. Saul could only advise, be careful. Byron nodded. Danger was everywhere. As long as one still wanted to walk the wizard's path and obtain that elusive yet forbidden knowledge, one couldn't fear danger. In this regard, they were all the same kind of people. After seeing off Senior Byron, Saul received an urgent letter. The letter read, "Black Tide will arrive in 1 month." Saul pinched it between 2 fingers, and the letter turned into fine gray dust that fell into the soil. He turned to look at Kelly, who was still waiting beside him, and said softly, "The black tide is coming soon." Kelly nodded, "I'll go with you." Saul nodded, and the two immediately prepared to depart. This time they weren't going to Evernight Empire, but to the Sighing Wall. That was also where Saul had chosen as the location for his 4th target in the Symphony of Fate. There was no ultra-long-distance teleportation array that could connect to the Sighing Wall. Such arrays consumed too much, and only the Stargate Council and Tribunal could afford them. Although Wizard Murphy at the Sighing Wall was also 4th rank, he hadn't operated the Sighing Wall as a faction, so he didn't have excess resources. This was also why everyone respected Wizard Murphy. After the Abyssal Eye appeared, he had devoted almost all his energy to fighting the Black Tide. But because of this, life at the Sighing Wall was actually quite harsh. Some wizards there needed to purchase resources from outside to conduct experiments. Saul and Kelly chartered an airship directly to rush to the Sighing Wall. Otherwise, walking slowly would take several months. The airship captain was still an acquaintance, Captain Harry, whom Saul had encountered when he was still an apprentice. However, while Captain Harry had dared to chat with apprentice Saul back then, now he kept his head down and didn't dare say anything. On the airship, Kelly was somewhat nervous. This was her first time participating in combat against the Black Tide, and if the battle became intense, she would have to deploy the Bone Dragon. Now Kelly could communicate with bone monsters like Byron, and after 3 years of continuous coordination, she no longer needed to constantly worry about the Bone Dragon losing control like she had at the Tribunal. To prepare for battle, Kelly locked herself in her cabin studying tactics, while Saul stood on deck discussing matters regarding the 4th target with Bate in the diary. My master also sent word earlier that he would depart with the monsters in the black tide when it recedes. I still haven't decided whether to make him my fourth target. Didn't you already test this twice before? I think Gorsa doesn't seem to mind much. He's going to the Abyssal Eye. Bait was somewhat surprised. Saul shouldn't distrust Gorsa so much. Do you think he won't come back? Saul looked down. The airship was speeding through the clouds, and from time to time he could see the dark yellow and deep green interwoven land below through gaps in the clouds. I once thought about entering the Abyssal Eye together with my master. He was someone with many trump cards and was most skilled at dealing with black tide pollution. But the outcome of doing that would be only one thing: death. This was the third time the diary had given a warning, with only the word death. The previous two times, due to accidents and advanced preparation, he had managed to get through them, but this time Saul had no clues whatsoever, because he understood almost nothing about the Abyssal Eye. Every time he thought of those words, an indescribable fear still lingered in his heart. It was as if when you weren't thinking about it, you didn't feel anything, but the more you thought about it, the more you would shiver. The most terrifying part was that Saul didn't even understand why he was trembling. It's still because of ignorance. Saul leaned on the ship's rail. He hadn't gone to the sighing wall for these 3 years, instead digesting the fate power brought by the first 3 symphony of fate targets. Now his strength had advanced further than before. Not to mention his magical power, his soul body had also become increasingly solid. Now if Frem threw him into the black tide near the Abyssal Eye again, Saul estimated he could cast magic normally without even needing the mermaid's tear. This alone surpassed all third-rank wizards. At the same time, he had used this powerful mental strength to upgrade all his trump card spells. Soul Blades had been completely upgraded to a 5th-rank spell, and when cast with Saul's strength, it could almost instantly kill ordinary 3rd-rank wizards. He had also integrated all the Touch of XX spells he had learned since apprenticeship into his soul fishing, and based on his current form and abilities, transformed it into a body form that could change into having over 100 tentacles, ash tentacles. The improved tentacles could not only absorb pollution from others' bodies, no longer limited to just black tide pollution, but could also inject stored pollution into others like venom. From now on, anyone wanting to fight him would have to consider whether they could survive several rounds of pollution without mutating. Finally, Saul had also combined the star-shaped eyes to design an ultimate killing move, which he named Deep Space Gaze. This technique was an indiscriminate attack that always erupted at 100% power, with eerie eyes covering Saul's entire body until he became an aggregate of eyes. Even Saul couldn't perfectly control this killing move. Once deployed for extended periods, all nearby existences would begin to mutate indiscriminately. Even an ordinary stone couldn't escape. To research this spell, Saul had designed many experimental scenarios. These test sites were all strictly sealed afterward, and some places were cleared by Saul using ash tentacles, then burned directly with fierce flames to prevent future troubles. Finally, Saul found a barren area in the Chaos Realm for a simple trial. The membrane surrounding the Chaos Realm seemed to also isolate most pollution. But even so, when Saul deployed Deep Space Gaze for close to a minute, the desert floor of the Chaos Realm showed a strange escape phenomenon. The sand formed depressions in human shapes, each human form appearing to be in a running posture. It was as if real people were lying on the ground and running away. Finally, Saul cleared the nearby area and directly burned this part of the desert into crystal, before eliminating this escape phenomenon. Besides these 3 most powerful trump cards, Saul had also learned some high-rank spells. With the enhancement of fate power, even spells complex enough to require a room full of books to record, Saul could quickly grasp the key points. Latest content published on N0 Velfire, small cap NET. This was the hidden enhancement brought by Fate Power. However, even having become so powerful and terrifying, when Saul planned to go to the Abyssal Eye, the diary still only gave him the word death. This made him extremely worried about Master Gorsa's situation. Could the other party really return alive? Or would what returned alive still be Gorsa? Chapter 918, First Arrival at Far North City. This place was covered in ice and snow year-round, and even the wizard's robes had fur collars around them. It looked very characteristic of the local area. Saul and Kelly disembarked from the airship and arranged with Captain Harry to pick them up in 45 days. Whether they could make the trip or not, they would pay the related fees. Captain Harry kept bowing and saying, "No need, no need. We'll come to pick you up even without payment." After bidding farewell to the cautious Captain Harry, Saul and Kelly walked side by side into Far North City in the far north. Passing through Far North City's walls, they could see the gray high wall standing on the northern coastline. That high wall looked several hundred meters tall, appearing like a huge barrier to ordinary people, separating them from the North Sea and giving them endless warmth and comfort. Therefore, like Evernight Empire, although Far North City suffered black tide invasions every few years, the ordinary people here could still live relatively peaceful lives. However, there were many wizards here, and ordinary people lived very cautiously, careful not to offend any wizards. But because Far North City still had many jobs that required ordinary people, and the wizards here didn't have a unified faction, a strange coexistence had formed. "Hello, welcome, how may I help you?" A beautiful ordinary girl wore a well-fitted blue fur jacket with a thick fabric dress underneath. The hem reached her ankles, revealing a pair of brown leather boots. She stood inside the inn entrance, looking at Saul and Kelly with a bright and generous smile. It reminded Saul of greeters at mid to high-end stores from before, except there was still a hint of caution in her smile. "We'd like to stay here for about a month. Do you have accommodations for wizards?" "Yes, please follow me, my lords. We have villa-style independent courtyards, as well as simple wizard towers of 4 floors or less." "Wizard towers?" Kelly asked with interest. "You can build wizard towers too?" The greeter girl answered earnestly with a full smile. "Yes, my lord. Our inn's owner is also a wizard. The wizard towers he built are equipped with simple isolation arrays and defensive arrays, with internal rooms for accommodation and laboratories. Basic instruments and tools are prepared, and if you have special requirements, you can also commission the inn to purchase them. We guarantee you can acquire all publicly sold goods in Far North City without leaving your quarters." "Then let's book a wizard tower." Kelly was obviously accustomed to living in wizard towers. She turned to ask for Saul's opinion. Saul naturally had no problem with it. So the two came to the back of the inn and selected a wizard tower at a higher position on the small mountain behind. This wizard tower had 4 floors in total, and each floor's function could be arranged according to the guest's needs. In the end, Kelly took charge of the arrangements, making the 3rd and 4th floors their living quarters, the 2nd floor the laboratory, and the 1st floor the entrance hall. The greeter girl seemed somewhat surprised when she heard Kelly's requirements, but she only dared to widen her eyes and didn't dare express more emotion. Saul went to pay, and also walked around half the back mountain of the inn. Quite a few wizards lived here, most choosing wizard towers. While wandering the back mountain, because Saul had restrained his magical fluctuations, others who saw him didn't know he was a 3rd-rank wizard. When they met, they basically just nodded briefly in greeting. Wizards were mostly polite but distant with each other. Without some time or shared experiences, it was hard to become familiar. Of course there were exceptions, but Saul hadn't encountered any yet. When he returned to their temporary wizard tower, he happened to see the greeter girl coming out of the wizard tower, clutching tightly the notebook recording Kelly's requirements. "You seemed somewhat surprised just now. Did you find something strange?" Saul stopped the girl. The girl was startled, then her face turned slightly red, then pale. She looked somewhat uneasy, but seeing that Saul was still waiting for her answer, she said honestly, You and Miss Kelly chose 2 bedrooms but share one laboratory, so I was just a bit surprised." Seeing that Saul showed no signs of anger, she took a deep breath and continued, "I've seen many wizards come together. They all share 1 bedroom, but the laboratories must definitely be separate. Some even install protective arrays and shielding arrays between 2 laboratories." Saul had thought there might be some special customs here, or that people had some particular lifestyle, but he hadn't expected this reason. He nodded and let go of the greeter, who was carefully watching him. "So other wizards can mostly sleep in the same bed, but can't share a laboratory, because they can have no secrets physically, but must guard against each other in magical research." Thinking this, Saul shook his head and walked into the wizard tower. "Why are you shaking your head? Did something happen?" Just then Kelly came bouncing down from upstairs. She had actually changed into local clothing, a white fur coat. The coat's hem was very wide, looking like a skirt, with loose and thick pants underneath and brown leather boots on her feet. She also wore a white long pile round hat, looking like a charming noble lady. Actually, Kelly was originally a noble lady. She had almost become a female marquis. "Nothing, I just find the atmosphere here quite interesting." Saul stood by the stairs, waiting for Kelly to come down. "There's a clothing transformation array in the room. The prepared clothing designs are all local specialty garments. After selecting one, it can be automatically generated, quite interesting. Do you want to try one?" "I don't need to. I'm not very sensitive to hot and cold." Saul smiled and shook his head. His body from inside to outside had no original organs left. Although he could clearly perceive changes in temperature, he wouldn't feel pain or comfort due to hot and cold. His tolerance was extremely high. Kelly naturally understood Saul's feelings. In fact, she was the same. Since receiving alpha radiation for years, her tolerance for pain had also increased greatly. Wearing summer dresses or winter fur coats in the far north felt the same to her. But this didn't prevent her curiosity about new-style clothing. Even if you don't want to change, I want to see you change." Kelly pulled Saul's arm, circled behind him, and pushed his back toward the stairs. Change. I've seen you look the same for so many years. Even if you're not tired of it, I am." Saul was helpless and let Kelly push him into the third-floor room. After entering the room, Saul saw the clothing transformation array Kelly had mentioned. Helplessly shaking his head as he walked into the array, Saul saw instructions about changing clothes and a 3-dimensional holographic operation platform appear before him. He quickly saw the clothing style Kelly had chosen, with corresponding menswear beside it, though the top wasn't as long, only reaching the thighs, and the collar also had fur. So Saul didn't spend time selecting and directly chose the corresponding menswear, but changed the color to black. After changing clothes, Saul walked down the stairs and saw Kelly leaning against the stair railing with a smile. "Very handsome." Only then did Saul suddenly remember the name of this outfit set, and his steps suddenly stopped. Just as he was about to say something, knocking suddenly came from the door. "Knock, knock, knock." "Excuse me, does Wizard Saul live here?" A somewhat aged and hoarse voice followed. Chapter 919, The Sighing Wall. Saul walked down to the first floor in 2 steps and went to open the door. "Hello, I'm Saul." Outside the door stood an elderly wizard with white hair and beard. His face was full of wrinkles, looking like a centenarian among ordinary people. He wore a gray fleece-lined robe and had a gentle smile on his face, with an aura like an ordinary person. Saul frowned slightly, looked him over, and asked hesitantly, "Lord Murphy." The other party's smile brightened a little. "How did you figure it out?" "I guess from context," Saul thought to himself. Of course he couldn't answer that way, so he only said, "My master mentioned you." "He would mention me." Murphy stroked his beard and looked up to see Kelly behind Saul. "Hello there, you must be Saul's friend." Saul turned back to call Kelly over. This fourth-rank wizard before him was still very worthy of respect. "Hello, Lord Murphy, my name is Kelly." Kelly performed a court curtsy. "Oh, I know you, the amazing little girl who destroyed the maze corridor." When speaking of this matter, Murphy was still smiling, without any intention of defending Frim. He seemed to not care at all that a fourth-rank wizard's dignity had been offended by a second-rank wizard. After greetings, Saul invited Murphy into the room, but Murphy had come personally to invite them to ascend the Sighing Wall. "Although you just arrived and should be allowed to rest first, with less than a month until the black tide strikes, I still want to hurry up and have a good chat with you." "All right, business comes first." Neither Saul nor Kelly had any objections. Murphy raised his staff and tapped it lightly on the ground. The surrounding environment instantly changed, and all three appeared simultaneously on a magnificent and towering gray structure. This structure resembled a high tower, standing 30 meters tall, already exceeding all buildings in Far North City. However, to the left of this building was a towering wall high enough to reach the sky, shooting straight into the clouds. Saul raised his head and felt as if heaven and earth had been inverted in an instant. Wind came from overhead, blowing on the ground and stirring up a patch of snowy mist. But when the white mist dispersed, he discovered it was just an illusion caused by the overwhelming majesty of the wall before him. "It's truly magnificent." Saul closed his eyes and seemed to hear sounds of fighting and waves from behind the high wall. Wave after wave, mixed with the noise of burning flesh and collapsing ice peaks. But when he opened his eyes, everything around was still quiet, with only the breathing sounds of the two people beside him. Murphy watched Saul with a smile, while Kelly seemed somewhat bewildered. She appeared to have felt nothing. "What is this?" Saul asked in confusion. "These are the memories of the Sighing Wall." Murphy stepped forward and touched the gray wall with his hand. His hand was dark yellow and aged, with wrinkles covering the knuckles. The bricks and stones of the Sighing Wall were covered with traces of wind erosion and rain carving. One person and one wall, full of the flavor of years. "This is the testimony of the Sighing Wall." Wizard Murphy's expression showed a moment of sadness, but he quickly restrained his emotions, turned and knocked the wall with his knuckles, producing a dull sound. Unfortunately, only those whose mental power approaches fourth rank can see this kind of phenomenon. Otherwise, I'd really like to set up a paid experience, letting wizards who want to train their soul bodies come and feel it. 2,000 magic crystals per session. It would instantly solve the financial problems of the far north. The mysterious and towering fourth-rank wizard suddenly became a shrewd merchant. Kelly opened her mouth wide, momentarily unable to accept it. Saul smiled and helped Wizard Murphy with an idea. "Even if they can't feel it, you could still charge for the experience. At worst, make it cheaper per session. I believe many people would come to try. After all, everyone has that what-if expectation. Just like buying lottery tickets." "That's a good idea. I'll have them plan it out." Murphy laughed heartily and struck the ground once with his staff. The platform they were standing on suddenly began rising rapidly. The wind instantly changed from gentle to fierce, and their clothes immediately pressed against their bodies. They rushed into the clouds within minutes. The platform's rapid ascent stopped abruptly. If not for Saul and Kelly's powerful abilities, they probably would have been thrown off by such an emergency brake. "This is the highest level of the Sighing Wall." Murphy led them from the platform to the top of the gray city wall. Here was a passage 10 meters wide, with alternating high and low merlons on both sides. At regular intervals were protruding platforms with magical arrays that stayed lit year-round. More than a dozen wizards stood guard in sections here, with the weakest being second-rank wizards. There were actually 4 third-rank wizards as well. The density was much greater than at the tribunal. Saul had seen the coastline topography of the far north. He knew the far north was like an acute triangle, and the Sighing Wall was right at the tip of this triangle. Therefore, the Sighing Wall's length couldn't compare to the Red Sea Tree Forest, but because it was closer to the Abyssal Eye, the area of enemy contact would actually be smaller. But the enemies were more powerful. Murphy led Saul and Kelly on a tour of the Sighing Wall, walking while introducing them to its history. The Sighing Wall was established in the 3rd year after the Abyssal Eye appeared, the 2nd year after Desettle Continent was swallowed. Although they all say, "I created the Sighing Wall," that's actually just exaggerated praise to flatter me. Murphy smiled, carelessly revealing his own shortcomings in front of Saul and Kelly. "Although I could create such a large wall, you know I major in earth attributes. I really had no way to guarantee that while maintaining the volume, this wall would also possess strength sufficient to resist the black tide. So besides my magical power, this place also represents the efforts of many 4th-rank wizards from far North City." Many 4th-rank wizards. Saul and Kelly exchanged glances. But wasn't Murphy currently the only 4th-rank wizard in far North City? Could it be that those previous 4th-rank wizards had all? Murphy saw their confusion and laughed heartily again. "Ha ha, you're young and don't know that before the Abyssal Eye fell into the wizard world and the black tide sealed this world's advancement paths, there were still double-digit numbers of 4th-rank wizards in the world. But now there are only 6 4th-rank wizards left, no, counting my master it's 7. Saul calculated and suddenly felt desolate. Yes, advancing to 4th rank is becoming increasingly difficult. Fortunately, Gorsa succeeded. However, it will soon return to 6 people. Murphy shook his head, his face full of emotion. "Are you referring to Lord Norton?" Saul also felt melancholy. 4th-rank wizards normally were immortal. They all had their own life cornerstones. As long as the cornerstone didn't perish, even if they died they could resurrect. Saul's foundation would be established on the powerful destiny power woven by the symphony of fate. This would be a secret known only to him. Even the consciousness bodies in the diary didn't know the true purpose of his symphony of fate arrangement. The only one who knew some inside information was Kismet. But the symphony of fate was also not completely the same as the death weaving that Kismet had given him. It was Saul's improved plan based on the fate line forms of the prismatic world. In the wizard world, only Saul himself knew the secrets related to fate lines. But 4th-rank wizards with life cornerstones weren't completely immortal either. At least Saul now knew that when a wizard's advancement path reached its end and he had no way to open new paths, his existence would fall into saturation. When the moon is full it wanes. When wizards fall into saturation, they would finally disappear. Just like ordinary people dying of old age. Chapter 920, Murphy's Proposal. The speed of advancing to 4th rank couldn't keep up with the speed at which the desperate ones disappeared. So naturally, the wizard world was left with only a few 4th rank wizards. Now, except for Gorsa, all other 4th rank wizards were over 100 years old, with some like Murphy already several hundred years old. The fall of the strongest combat power was a negative topic that Murphy didn't want to discuss before the Black Tide's arrival. So he changed the subject. "How is it? This Sighing Wall is pretty good, right?" Saul nodded and praised sincerely. "Very spectacular." The wizards fighting here are mostly free wizards without any factions. However, High-level combat power still relies on support from other major forces. Most third-rank wizards come from Escaper Continent and the Glare family. Murphy led Saul to look at the storm sea on the other side. In the distance, several tall, slender wizard towers could be vaguely seen. Each wizard tower was like a lighthouse at sea, but in terms of function, they were more like rocket silos extending from the sighing wall. The guardians of those wizard towers you see are at least second-rank wizards. At the farthest point, where the naked eye can't see, there are also several wizard towers. Those all require third-rank wizards to guard. Your master Gorsa is at the frontmost wizard tower. With him there in the previous Black Tide attacks, many Black Tide monsters were destroyed before they could even approach. To be honest, I really can't bear to let him go. Murphy seemed somewhat lost in thought, not knowing what he was thinking about. However, although one must fight Black Tide monsters here, one can also obtain many rare resources that can't be found elsewhere. Saul, does your borderland have any interest in lending people to guard here? I haven't imposed mandatory requirements on what the wizards of Rhine City must do. I can tell them about this matter, but I can't be certain what choices they'll ultimately make. That's fine. You can tell them that resources obtained outside the sighing wall don't need to be handed over. They can keep them directly. The sighing wall doesn't take a cut. Saul hadn't expected this. A wall is just a wall. During battles, everyone helps each other mutually. There's no rule about who must hand over profits to whom. Moreover, we also provide resources to wizards who guard here for long periods. The longer they stay, the more we give. Murphy transformed into a salesman, constantly introducing the benefits of working here. Saul suppressed his laughter and nodded. All right, I think there should still be many people who'd want to come. Murphy patted Saul's shoulder. You don't need to worry about them not returning once they come out. After all, who doesn't know now that you're the Black Tide medic? Their lives are in your hands. Ha. Seeing Saul agree to his proposal, Murphy had accomplished his purpose for today's casual chat with Saul. He asked Saul, do you want to continue touring or go back and rest? Since Saul had come out, he didn't plan to return so easily. I want to go find my master directly. Kelly tilted her head and thought for a moment. Then I'll stay here. Kelly still had a psychological shadow regarding Gorsa. Although she had come with Saul this time to coordinate with him in battle, hearing that Saul wanted to find Gorsa made her immediately back down. I understand. Even many of our third-rank patrol wizards don't dare to go find Gorsa. His temper is a bit strange. Murphy wasn't surprised at all by Kelly's fear of Gorsa. He told Kelly where she could go, where she'd be stopped by patrolling wizards, and how to leave the sighing wall. After that, he personally took Saul to find Gorsa. This time, Murphy didn't teleport with Saul. With the Black Tide approaching, even he would avoid using teleportation. The atmosphere outside the sighing wall was obviously different from Far North City. No people could be seen around, but magical fluctuations still came from different positions. The sound of the sea dominated heaven and earth. The cloud layer overhead was very thick, rolling, and moving rapidly in the air with the wind. The dark tones had an urgent feeling of impending great battle. Murphy's voice sounded in the sea wind. Saul, would you consider coming to guard at the sighing wall for a while? Saul didn't answer immediately. Murphy turned his head. Unlike his previous sales pitch, his expression was now more serious. You're very strong now. You almost never fail when dealing with storm eyes. Actually, you no longer need to be stationed year-round in the borderland like previous third-rank wizards. If you still want to advance further, I still suggest you come guard at Storm Sea for a while. Personally fight the Black Tide monsters here and feel the world under changing rules. You might be able to rely on these to find your future path. Guard at Storm Sea, Saul considered it. He had come to visit Master Gorsa, and also to decide on the matter of the fourth target for his Symphony of Fate. If he guarded at Storm Sea, it would mean spending the Black Tide's arrival in a wizard tower outside the Sighing Wall. This way he wouldn't be able to search for suitable targets in the far north. But what Murphy said made a lot of sense, and Saul was tempted. His participation in the Black Tide defense battle at Evernight had brought Saul great rewards. So at the Sighing Wall, it might not be impossible to have another such experience. As for the fourth target, he could decide after meeting Gorsa. All right, then I'll fight alongside the Sighing Wall and the wizards here once. Murphy smiled with relief, but then he said something strange. Very good, I'll find someone to coordinate with you. However, after this Black Tide passes, you should still leave as soon as possible. Saul found it somewhat strange. Why did Wizard Murphy suddenly say something about driving him away? Even if the Black Tide receded, he could stay for a while, couldn't he? Under Saul's gaze, Murphy only looked straight ahead. After this Black Tide, both the Stargate Council and Norton might come looking for you. This sentence also seemed like an excuse for his sudden dismissal. Otherwise, couldn't he receive messages from Wizard Norton and the others while at the Sighing Wall? Although puzzled, Saul only nodded in agreement without continuing to ask. Wizard Murphy might have other hidden circumstances he hadn't mentioned. Lord Murphy. Suddenly a figure rapidly approached and loudly called out to Wizard Murphy. The two immediately stopped and saw a witch hurrying from the Sighing Wall. "Oh, it's Maria," Murphy asked. "What's wrong?" The wizard named Maria glanced at Saul, then said quickly, "Lord Murphy, Wizard Rizel has returned from Escaper Continent and wants to see you." "Oh," Murphy frowned, obviously taking this wizard named Rizel very seriously. He said to Saul somewhat apologetically, "Saul, I have matters to attend to, so I won't escort you over. However, Maria is a patrol wizard here who has worked at the Sighing Wall for decades and is very familiar with this place. Let her take you to find Gorsa." "Of course, no problem," Saul quickly said. "Lord Murphy, please go attend to your business." Murphy nodded apologetically again, then turned and flew away, obviously faster than when he came. Maria breathed a sigh of relief seeing Murphy return, then looked at Saul and smiled. "Wizard Saul, let me take you to find Lord Gorsa." Just as Saul was about to agree, he suddenly felt something emerging from the sea surface beneath his feet. Maria was a step slower, but also quickly looked down. Next, the two saw a half-rotten, giant monster resembling a goat drilling up from beneath the sea surface, raising huge splashes. Looking at the rotting goat charging straight at them, Saul wasn't nervous but was somewhat surprised. A Black Tide monster. The Black Tide hasn't arrived yet. How can there be Black Tide monsters in the sea?